Arya Stark stood at the edge of the Red Keep's once grand courtyard, its scorched stones still smelling faintly of smoke and ash from Daenerys Targaryen's final stand. The whispers of ghosts and echoes of war lingered in every crevice, a reminder that kings and queens were made and unmade here by power, betrayal, and, sometimes, fate itself. She remembered the day she had first arrived in King's Landing, a young girl from the north with a sword that felt too big for her hand and a restless heart that had not yet experienced true loss. Many roads, battles, and transformations later, she was here again, older, wearier, and carrying the weight of a name that could either keep her safe or condemn her to 1,000 new dangers. Yet despite the raw, rasping sense of uncertainty, something else roiled inside her, an unlooked-for sense of purpose. She had come a long way from the fearless child who had stepped onto these streets with nothing but the clothes on her back and the unwavering hope of reuniting her family. Though Daenerys Targaryen had fallen, the city was still wounded from the Dragonfire, the decimation of entire districts, and the renewed memory of past betrayals. People walked the streets in a traumatized hush, eyes always casting upward as if expecting another winged silhouette against the sky. Soot marked the stones, and broken beams jutted like ribs from the remains of what had once been homes. It might have been easier for Arya to turn her back on all of it, to ride away on the next ship leaving Blackwater Bay and find a new horizon, a new challenge. She had, after all, always been the girl who sought the unknown. But something stayed her. She had witnessed the cycle of violence so many times. She had memorized the faces of the dead. She felt that perhaps, in this time of vulnerability and dread, someone with her perspective, someone who did not thirst for power but who understood the shape of it, the price of it, might be what the realm needed. She walked with measured steps toward the throne room's towering doors, guards posted on either side. They wore mismatched armor, a testament to the confusion and disarray after Daenerys' downfall. Soldiers from both the north and the scattered remains of the Unsullied looked on, uncertain what protocol they should follow now. Some recognized Arya Stark on sight, others did not. No one barred her way. Even with the castle's confusion, most had heard stories of the girl who had ended the Night King, who had trodden where men twice her size feared to go. A hush spread among them as she passed, as though they sensed the silent promise that clung to her footsteps. She entered the great hall. Tattered banners hung from the walls. The monstrous iron throne, forged centuries ago from Aegon's conquered swords, loomed at the far end of the room, its sharp edges and spines as deadly as any threat. A small cadre of advisors and lords had already begun to gather, whispers traveling from lip to ear. Arya could see among them figures she recognized. Davos Seaworth, looking heavier of heart than ever before, Brienne of Tarth, tall and resolute, with sorrow etched into her still loyal eyes, Tyrion Lannister, exhausted but with a spark of resilience. And there was Sansa, her older sister, the once naive girl who had grown into a pragmatic, brilliant leader, wearing clothes that befitted her status as the Lady of Winterfell, if not more. Their gazes fell upon Arya the moment she stepped into the room. A hush accompanied her entry. 1,000 unwoven threads connected them all, losses, alliances, secrets best left unspoken, and the unbreakable, winding ties of the Stark family. More than anything, a keen sense of responsibility hung in the air. Someone had to lead. Someone had to shoulder the burden of picking up the pieces Daenerys had left behind. No one said it outright, but every look suggested that they were all searching for a single figure they could trust. Davos stepped forward first. "Arya," he said, bowing his head slightly, never having forgotten her role in the defeat of the Night King. "I did not know you had returned from your travels." Tyrion, hands folded in front of him, added, "So much has changed since last you stepped foot in these halls. We can use every wise head we can find, especially one that has proven her bravery." Arya scanned them both. "I was passing through," she said, though it was not the entire truth. In her wanderings, the thought of home had drawn her like a lodestar. She had turned her face west and then south. She could not stop thinking about what might become of the realm she had fought for if it was left to its own chaos. "I heard rumors. Stories that we're on the brink of more bloodshed. That the city is leaderless. But that can't be true, can it? We have the North, we have the Riverlands, the Vale, and what remains of the Stormlands. We have leaders." Sansa's voice, quiet yet unwavering, carried through the hall. "Leaders, yes, but no unity. There are factions dividing the realm again. Some still loyal to the memory of Daenerys. Others forming new alliances, jockeying for position. And many looking to the north for guidance." Arya nodded. "Jon?" she asked, a pink swelling in her chest at the mention of their brother. Brienne's gaze fell. "He's gone beyond the wall, likely to stay there. His choice, his exile, his peace. He seemed resolved." Arya felt an ache, but she knew Jon well enough to understand his need to go north. The realm had asked too much of him, and he had witnessed too many atrocities. Yet a part of her had hoped he would return, that maybe they would fight side by side once more. She took a breath and steadied herself. If it's chaos you fear, then we need order. But that order can't come from fear. We all saw what that brand of leadership did. Tyrion's tired eyes lit with something like hope. I've been saying that for days. The only question is who will unify everyone. He paused, looking from Sansa to Arya and then to the others in the room. We tried a vote. We tried selecting a king by council, and we placed Bran on the throne. But you all know how that ended. His voice wavered. There was no ill will, only the regret of a world that was never truly at rest. Arya knew the story. Bran had attempted to rule, guided by an otherworldly wisdom beyond the comprehension of most men. But his watchful detachment had sowed distrust, fear even. Many questioned a monarch who seemed less human each day, whose eyes saw beyond mortal constraints. A conspiracy of fearful lords eventually ousted him, sending the realm into its new crisis. In the aftermath, leadership had become a vacuum, a black hole devouring hopes and stoking tensions. She looked around again, and the question that hung in the air made her heart pound. Was anyone expecting her to sit upon that throne of swords? The very notion made her stomach knot. She had never wanted to be a lady of a holdfast, let alone the queen of the 7 or however many kingdoms. The sight of that seat made from the weapons of the conquered made her think of every injustice she had seen, every friend and family member she had lost. But in the hush that followed, she sensed the gravity that only she might possess. She was a Stark, she was trusted by many, and her deeds were legendary. Most importantly, she did not covet power. And sometimes, Arya reasoned, that was the strongest claim of all. She took a step closer to the throne, feeling the cold aura of metal in the air. The points of the swords jutted up like a warning. A single droplet of water fell from the roof, maybe from a crack that had let the storms rain in, and it echoed. She heard her own heartbeat in her ears. She thought of her father's lessons, of her mother's devotion, of Robb's fate and Jon's struggles, of the unbending resilience of Sansa and Bran's quiet transformation into something both wise and distant. Her family, once so scattered, had shaped the fate of an entire continent. Now, once again, it seemed that a Stark had a part to play in determining the future. Yet, she did not sit. Instead, she turned to face the small gathering that was slowly growing as more lords, knights, and counselors arrived. I have never wanted a throne, Arya said quietly, her voice carrying a gentle steel. I only ever wanted to keep my family safe, to protect the realm from the nightmares beyond the wall, and to do what felt right. But I also know what can happen if power is placed in the hands of those who hunger for it. She saw recognition in Davos's eyes, saw the same in Tyrion's. They had watched kings and queens rise and fall in a bloody dance for power. They knew better than most how ill-suited ambition could be to forging true peace. She took another breath, scanning the room. I don't want to be your queen, she began. But if the realm needs someone to guide it for a time, to bring a real measure of justice, then I will not turn away. Her words might have been bolder if she had shouted them, but that had never been Arya's way. Quiet confidence, honesty, and a willingness to shed blood when she must, those were her hallmarks. And so she spoke softly, her hand resting upon the hilt of the dagger at her waist, the one made from Valyrian steel. She saw hearts in those gathered begin to settle, anxieties eased at the thought of a leader who would not seek to exploit them. Tyrion inclined his head in respect. You speak with more wisdom than many who have come before. Sansa walked toward her sister and gently reached out to take Arya's hand. You've never wished for titles or power, she murmured. But you do care about people. I know you do. Perhaps that's what we need, someone who won't rule for personal gain or ambition. The chorus of agreement rose like the murmur of the tide. And suddenly Arya realized that the city, the kingdoms, the lords, and the common folk might soon pin their hopes upon her. Was she ready for that burden? Did she have a choice? Too many times she had watched as capable leaders turned away only to let power fall into the hands of tyrants. If she refused, who would take up the mantle? Someone well-meaning but corruptible, or someone cunning who thirsted for dominion over the broken realm? She closed her eyes, seeing in her mind's eye the faces of those she had lost. Then she opened them, her gaze like tempered steel. I will do this, Arya said, but I will do it in a new way. No more blind loyalty. No more cowering subjects. No more unending cycles of vengeance. If I take the throne, I will make changes. The first of them is that I will not rely on tradition for tradition's sake. The North remains free, as I promised Sansa. But the rest of the realm needs leadership. Let them follow me if they choose. Let them help shape their destiny. She stepped toward the Iron Throne and turned her back on it, facing the onlookers. This seat, she said, motioning behind her, is a symbol of fear and conquest. If I am to rule, let it be known I will never rule by terror. We need to heal. We need to rebuild." A clamor of voices followed as more lords, commoners, and knights filed in, drawn by the rumors swirling that a new Stark was about to claim the throne. Brienne of Tarth spoke with a certain reverence. "Whatever you decide, my sword is yours, as it has been sworn to the Starks before." Then came calls from the crowd, echoes of an emotion rarely heard in these halls of late: hope. Still, doubt lingered on a few faces, for who could believe that a girl not yet 20 could keep these fragile kingdoms in check? In the back of the room, a minor lord muttered that it was madness to place faith in a ghost of a Stark. But even as he whispered his dissent, the memory of Arya Stark's feats silenced him. She was not an ordinary girl, and they all knew it. In the hours that followed, Arya spoke with Sansa, Tyrion, Davos, Brienne, and several key lords and ladies in one of the side chambers. They convened around a dark wooden table, the candlelight flickering across their drawn faces. Maps were unfurled, maps detailing the damage in King's Landing, the rebellions brewing in the Stormlands, the uncertain alliances in Dorne. Words turned to half-finished plans, to the mustering of resources, to tasks that would require months or years. Arya listened more than she talked. She noted each problem carefully, as if memorizing the steps to a complicated dance. When she did speak, she offered straightforward proposals. She called upon them to bring in more stonemasons to rebuild King's Landing from the ashes. She suggested sending peace emissaries to the Stormlands and working out a mutual treaty that would benefit all sides. And she demanded that justice be fair and swift, that any who preyed on the weak in this time of chaos be punished without delay. As she spoke, Tyrion nodded approval, scribbling notes. Sansa watched with proud, grave eyes, while Davos contributed a pragmatic approach to shipping and trade. This was the new face of power, and it was not lost on anyone in the room that it was decidedly different from the past. No one was using fear to keep the lords in check. Instead, rational persuasion, alliances, and a shared vision guided them. Yet the question remained, would the lords accept Arya's terms? Would they recognize her as queen if she vowed not to rule as past kings and queens did? By midnight, the question was answered. Letters were sent out, ravens dispatched in all directions. Within the walls of the Red Keep, those who remained gathered in the throne room for a simple coronation, if it could even be called that. There were no grand ceremonies, no elaborate feasts, not even a new set of regal gowns for Arya. She stood before the gathered watchers in the same leathers she had worn that day, her sword by her side. Davos, Tyrion, Brienne, and Sansa bore witness. A handful of other lords and ladies swore fealty. And then, with little fuss or pomp, Davos placed the faint remnants of a crown, one that had once belonged to a Targaryen, resmelted and stripped of its dragon motifs, upon Arya's head. It felt heavy, oddly cold, and it sent a strange thrill down her spine. She had never wanted a crown. Yet as it rested upon her brow, and as she saw the relief, hope, and determination in those assembled, she understood that sometimes burdens found you whether you wanted them or not. And so, in a quiet, candlelit hall still lined with rubble from the city's recent devastation, Arya Stark of Winterfell, the girl who had once been no one, became the new leader of the realm. The next day broke with a merciless sun, illuminating all the cracks and scars of the city. Arya rose before dawn. She exchanged a few words with Sansa, who was half preparing to return to the north, partly to see to her duties as Lady of Winterfell, and partly to let Arya stand on her own. "You are the queen now," Sansa said with a small, wry smile. "Though you've never much cared for being addressed so formally." "I still don't," Arya replied. "But it's not about me. It's about all of them. Everyone who lost someone when Daenerys burned this city, or when Cersei's cruelty twisted the realm. I need to honor those losses by doing better." Sansa squeezed her sister's hand in silent reassurance. Then she left, taking a small retinue of northern soldiers. Arya watched them go with a pang of longing. She missed the north already. Its crisp air, the silent beauty of its snows, the simple honesty of its people. Yet she stayed because that was the cost of responsibility. She had always been free to wander, to chase horizons. But now that freedom came tethered by duty, perhaps in time, she would find ways to bring both together. But that day was not now. She spent her morning touring the ruins with Tyrion and Brienne, followed by a handful of guards. They passed through broken streets, where the people of King's Landing scoured the rubble for salvaged goods. Some recognized Arya and bowed hesitantly, uncertain how to treat this new queen. Others cast suspicious glances, carrying the memory of betrayal and bloodshed in their hearts. Children gathered in doorways, wide-eyed. It was a city grown accustomed to nightmares, and hope was a foreign visitor. Arya stopped often to talk to the people. She asked them about their needs. Did they have enough bread and water? Were the orphanages tended to? Who was policing the streets at night? She made promises she intended to keep. Tyrion took down notes, frowning at the bleak tallies of supplies. Brienne stood at the ready, ensuring none would harm their new monarch. And Arya kept her word. Within days, wagons of grain were brought in from the Reach, hastily negotiated by Davos with the Tyrell bannermen who still oversaw those fertile fields. The city watch was restructured, no longer a tool for tyranny but a force for genuine order. The people began to see changes, small but meaningful ones. Not everyone welcomed these changes, of course. In the dark corners of King's Landing, pockets of resentment festered. Some whispered that Arya Stark was no legitimate queen. Others believed she was too soft, that the realm needed a strong-handed ruler to stamp out insurrections. A few still held out hope for another Targaryen claimant, some hidden scion of the Dragonblood who might reclaim the throne by fire and fear. Arya knew this. She had no illusions that claiming the throne would silence all dissent. So she took precautions. She listened to Tyrion's counsel about how best to disarm potential threats before they could incite uprisings. She sent letters to Dorne and the Iron Islands, inviting them to meet and discuss how they might come together under a looser confederation rather than forced subjugation. The days bled into weeks. As the city slowly mended, Arya found herself pulled into endless meetings with lords, ladies, merchants, guild leaders, and envoys from far-flung regions of Westeros. Sometimes she hated it. She missed the simplicity of being on the road, the clarity of a sword in her hand and an enemy in front of her. But she approached every conversation, every negotiation, with the same deliberate care she once reserved for studying a new dance of swordplay. She saw each person as a puzzle. She weighed their words, seeking the hidden motivations behind them. And when she made promises, she kept them. Word spread quickly that the new queen was honest, though not generous with second chances for those who sought to manipulate or exploit the realm's fragile state. Under her guidance, the city watch was sent into the poorest areas not to terrorize but to protect. Roads were cleared and made safer for trade. It was not an easy process. More than once, her men returned battered, having discovered pockets of bandits or old sellswords loyal to Daenerys' memory. Occasionally, she would ride out to quell the worst of these troubles herself. Word spread of the queen in simple leathers, dagger at her hip, leading from the front. Amid all this, Arya made a point of hosting open courts in the throne room once a week at least, where any subject could come speak their mind. Initially, the turnout was small. People were too frightened or too disbelieving to stand before the Iron Throne and address their sovereign. But when the first few petitioners arrived, an old woman who had lost her daughter during the dragon's destruction, a blacksmith short on supplies, a young boy seeking justice for a stolen horse, they found not a cold overlord, but a thoughtful girl with a quiet presence who listened and rendered decisions with fairness. Slowly, more began to come. And in this way, Arya learned the shape of her kingdom not just from maps and counselors' reports, but from the lips of her people. Between the tasks of rebuilding, maintaining tenuous alliances, and quelling internal strife, Arya found little time to breathe. But she did not complain. If anything, the relentless pace helped her push away the pains of the past. She needed to believe that her father, her mother, and all her fallen siblings would have been proud to see what she was doing. Sometimes, at night, when the candles burned low in her chamber, she held needle in her hands and thought of Jon, of that day when he had gifted her the sword that had changed her destiny. She wondered where he was beyond the wall and whether he would ever return. She imagined him walking beneath the auroras of the true north, carrying the memory of battles won and lost. Weeks turned into months. The city's skyline slowly changed. Scaffoldings rose where new buildings were being erected. The Red Keep, still looming with its scars, once again bustled with life. New servants, new guards, new laughter. Davos oversaw trade deals that replenished the city's coffers. Tyrion managed the courtly intrigue with deftness, ensuring no single faction gained too much power or influence. Brienne joined with the newly trained City Watch for nightly patrols, forging an elite unit dedicated to protecting the most vulnerable. And Arya, she was everywhere. Hearing petitions, riding out to quell unrest, meeting dignitaries from Dorne who tested her sense of justice and fairness, or from the Iron Islands who tested her patience. During that period, she also devoted time to ensuring that the small folk received justice. She decreed that anyone who wished to bring a grievance against a lord would be heard by the crown's representatives, a concept that sparked both gratitude and resentment. Lords with old privileges grumbled that the queen was undermining their authority. Arya responded curtly that authority was a responsibility, not a right, and that if they misused it, they did not deserve to hold it. It was bold, radical even, but step by step, it won her the loyalty of the common people. They began to tell stories of the Wolf Queen, how she was as swift and silent as a dire wolf on the hunt, how she would not hesitate to confront any noble or knight if she believed they were acting unjustly. Of course, this made her enemies. Whispers circulated about possible conspiracies. Arya received occasional threats, letters warning her that she would face the same fate as her father if she continued to challenge the old ways. But she did not relent. She knew that if the throne claimed her life, at least she would have tried to rule with a sense of decency and fairness. And it was that unwavering stance that slowly, grudgingly, began to command even the respect of those who had reason to fear her. One evening, returning late from an inspection of the city walls, Arya found Tyrion waiting for her in the queen's private study, a small chamber off the main corridor. He was sipping a cup of wine, as was his habit, and wore a thoughtful expression. "You look worried," Arya said, removing her gloves and taking a seat across from him. Tyrion gave a half-shrug. "I always look worried, Your Grace. But tonight I have cause." He gestured to a piece of parchment. "There's troubling news from the Stormlands. A new group calling themselves the Fireborn are rallying peasants and minor lords, claiming Daenerys' legacy and promising vengeance. They say that no Stark has the right to rule the Iron Throne. They have a leader who calls herself the Storm Dragon, some rumored bastard with Targaryen blood, or so she claims." Arya felt a chill wash over her. Another Targaryen pretender, or at least someone who claimed the name. The realm had seen pretenders before, and often they caused more chaos than any actual contender. She leaned forward. "How large is their following?" Tyrion tapped the parchment. "According to this letter, a few thousand peasants, a handful of knights, and possibly some sellswords. But this is the Stormlands, harsh weather, difficult terrain, and some houses that still resent the north. They might grow stronger if we ignore them." The old Arya, the lone wolf, would have slipped into the night and confronted them on her own, a dagger at the leader's throat before dawn. But the queenly Arya knew that such an act, while personally tempting, might risk escalation. Still, she would not stand by idly while a rebellion brewed. "We'll send a raven demanding they cease. Offer them pardons if they disband," she decided. "But if they continue to gather arms, we ride to meet them. I will not allow a war to fester." Tyrion nodded approval but still looked uneasy. "Should that fail, you know what must be done?" Arya nodded, but she held back a sigh. This was the part of ruling she hated, knowing that sometimes blood must be spilled to keep the realm from tumbling into endless war. When she had agreed to this role, she vowed to minimize such conflicts, but she had never been naive enough to think she could abolish them entirely. Over the next few weeks, ravens flew back and forth. The Fireborn refused all offers of pardon. They were spurred on by their charismatic leader, a woman rumored to have silver gold hair and violet eyes, though no one could confirm it. The stories of Daenerys' cruelty during the siege of King's Landing did not deter her followers, who instead saw their fallen queen as a martyr. Arya called upon Brienne, Davos, and the armies loyal to the crown. She did not want a large-scale conflict, but she had to be prepared for one. Soldiers from the Reach, from the Vale, and from loyal Stormlands houses were mustered. At the head of them, Arya donned leathers and armor, wearing no crown but carrying the symbol of her station. She remembered all too clearly her training in the House of Black and White, how she had learned to be both silent and lethal. Now, she had to be neither fully assassin nor naive queen. She needed to strike a balance. She marched her forces south, crossing through the battered riverlands. Refugees lined the roads, fleeing from skirmishes or bandits. She ordered her troops to protect them, to distribute food where possible. Word spread of a monarch who personally made sure each refugee was safe, who spoke to them kindly and offered them what meager solace she could. That generosity won her further favor among the small folk, but it also slowed her advance. If the Fireborn were to exploit that, they could easily ambush or harass her columns. But the Storm Dragon did not launch small raids. Instead, her forces took control of a fortress near the storm's end coastline. This fortress, perched on cliffs overlooking a violent sea, was once a lesser seat of Baratheon bannermen. Now, it bristled with makeshift defenses, scorpions atop the ramparts, and an army of peasants turned zealots who believed they fought for the true queen. Arya's forces surrounded the fortress, outnumbering the defenders nearly 2-1, but assaulting such a strong position would be costly. She established camp a few miles away, near a ravine that offered some shelter from the coastal winds. Tents sprang up, sentries posted. At night, the thunder of the storm battered the cliffs and lightning revealed the silhouette of the fortress. Arya often stood on a ridge, watching the glow of torches on the ramparts, pondering her next move. Several days passed. Arya tried sending envoys with a final offer: lay down arms, renounce the pretender, and go free. The storm dragon's reply was blood. Her archers fired upon the envoys, killing 2 and sending the rest fleeing with injuries and dire warnings. The time for negotiation had ended. Before dawn on the 6th day, Arya gathered her commanders. Brienne stood tall, her cloak soaked from the unrelenting rain. Davos had grown weathered over the years, the lines on his face deeper but his quiet resolve shining. Tyrion was there too, though he would remain behind the lines, orchestrating strategy. Arya looked at them all. "We end this today," she said. "I will not see more peasants used as cannon fodder for a lie." She ordered a 2-pronged attack. One force would feign an assault on the main gate, drawing defenders and archers to the walls. Meanwhile, a smaller, elite group led by Brienne would scale the cliffs on the eastern side, where the fortress was less guarded but treacherous. Arya herself would join Brienne's group. She trusted no one more than Brienne to have her back in the heat of a dangerous infiltration. Under the cover of a howling storm, they descended to the rocky shoreline. Waves crashed violently and the slick rocks threatened to send them plunging into the sea. They climbed the jagged cliff face, hammered in pitons, and slowly ascended, chilled by the spray of salt water and the relentless wind. Their steel and grappling hooks clinked quietly, swallowed by the thunder overhead. It took an hour, or maybe 2. By the time Arya reached the top, her fingers were near numb, her hair plastered to her face. But she pulled herself onto a narrow ledge, and Brienne followed, along with a handful of the best knights and soldiers from their combined forces. The fortress wall here was shorter, less than half the height of the main battlements. Still, it was guarded. 3 sentries patrolled. Before they could raise an alarm, Arya sprang into action. She moved with lethal grace, drawing her dagger and slipping behind the first guard. A quick, silent slash, and he collapsed. Brienne tackled the second guard, grappling him to the ground. The third tried to shout, but an arrow from a loyal soldier silenced him. Within moments, the sentries lay still. They slipped over the wall. Beyond it, the courtyard was ablaze with torchlight and the clamor of men rushing toward the main gate, where the bulk of Arya's forces were launching their diversion. Drums pounded, voices shouted. The Storm Dragon soldiers ran to reinforce the gate, leaving only a skeleton guard at the eastern side. Arya's group wove through half-ruined corridors and a courtyard strewn with barrels and crates. Every so often, they dispatched a stray guard or an unsuspecting archer. Stealth was their greatest ally. Finally, they reached an inner keep, the likely seat of the Storm Dragon. A pair of heavy wooden doors loomed, barred shut. Brienne signaled for a battering ram brought by the soldiers. They swung it once, twice, thrice against the door. On the 4th strike, the wood splintered and they poured into the keep's great hall. A hush fell as they found themselves face to face with a small assembly of zealots, about 20 strong, armed with spears and swords. And at their center stood a woman, tall, cloaked in black, her hood pulled back to reveal indeed a cascade of pale, almost silver hair. Arya couldn't tell if her eyes were truly violet or just reflecting the torchlight, but the resemblance to a Targaryen was striking enough to stir unease. "So the Wolf Queen has come at last," the woman sneered, raising a sword that glittered under the flickering torches. "You come to finish what your kinsman started when he murdered Queen Daenerys." Arya held her ground. Rainwater dripped from her clothes onto the stone floor. Lightning flashed beyond the windows, illuminating the tension between the 2 leaders. "Jon Snow is no murderer," she said evenly. "He saved countless lives." The woman's laugh was harsh. "He stole the throne from the rightful queen, as did you, Stark. But today, we reclaim it in the name of the dragons." With that cry, the zealots attacked. Spear tips lunged, swords slashed. Brienne parried a blow aimed for Arya, knocking the spear aside with such force the wielder staggered. Arya drew needle, the sword that had first taught her how to fight, and moved with a fluidity that had been honed by years of training and battles. Each step was an echo of her father's lessons, of the Hound's brutal tutelage, of the Faceless Men's lethal artistry. She dodged, spun, and struck. The hall erupted in a cacophony of steel against steel, shouts of fury, and the muffled sounds of bodies hitting the ground. The Storm Dragon fought ferociously, and it was clear she possessed some measure of skill. She clashed with one of Arya's knights, swiftly disarming him. Brienne lunged in, but the woman twisted away, cutting a swath through two more soldiers. Arya narrowed her eyes and advanced, weaving through the melee until she faced the self-proclaimed Storm Dragon. Their blades met with a ring of steel that reverberated in Arya's bones. This woman was strong, fueled by fanaticism or perhaps genuine belief. But Arya had fought the Night King, had stood against the many-faced god's deadliest killers. She parried a thrust, stepped inside the woman's guard, and brought the pommel of needle crashing into the side of her head. Dazed, the Storm Dragon stumbled but managed to slash at Arya's arm. Pain flared as the blade bit flesh. Gritting her teeth, Arya twisted, grabbing the woman's wrist and yanking hard. They fell in a tangle, swords clattering to the stone floor. The Storm Dragon snarled, trying to claw at Arya's face, but Arya pinned her down, pressing a knee into her chest, the Valyrian dagger at her throat. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. The hall still raged with fighting, but for Arya, all that existed was the woman beneath her and the lethal point inches from drawing blood. She remembered the code she had tried to live by as a queen: minimal bloodshed, no unnecessary killings. A part of her whispered that this woman had killed her people, was rallying a rebellion that could engulf the realm in flames. But another part of Arya recalled how she had once been a child thirsting for revenge, reciting names of those she despised. She wondered whether the Storm Dragon was just another soul caught in the vicious circle of vengeance. "Yield," Arya hissed, breath ragged. "Yield, and I will give you a trial." The woman spat blood. "A trial in your court? How fair?" She laughed, a manic edge to her voice. "You might kill me here and now, or you might parade me before your lords, but my followers will never bend the knee. They will rise." Arya's eyes flickered to the swirling fight around them. The zealots were outnumbered, being methodically subdued by her soldiers. Outside, the thunder crashed. Another wave of lightning illuminated the woman's face, twisted in fury. For a moment, Arya felt the weight of the entire realm pressing upon her. She had to end this rebellion. If she let it fester, it would spread and more would die. She looked the woman in the eyes. "I do not want more bloodshed," Arya said. "But I will protect these people even if I must kill you to do it." The Storm Dragon's answer was to lunge upward suddenly, trying to stab Arya with a concealed dagger. But Arya's reflexes were forged from countless near-deaths. She jerked aside, then drove the Valyrian steel into the woman's heart. It was a clean, swift strike. The Storm Dragon gasped, eyes wide, and her body went limp. Arya knelt there, breathing heavily, feeling the hot blood soaking into her gloves. Slowly, she stood, pulling her dagger free. The hall fell silent. The remaining zealots dropped their weapons, faces etched with horror and despair at seeing their leader fall. One by one, they sank to their knees in surrender. Brienne, panting from exertion, looked at Arya with concern. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. Arya could feel the warm trickle from her wounded arm, but nodded. "I will be." She stared at the body on the floor, the woman who had claimed a destiny that was not hers. Arya wondered what might have happened if circumstances were reversed. If she had grown up hearing tales of a father she never knew, obsessed with vengeance, certain she was the rightful heir. She closed her eyes. This was the reality of being queen. Sometimes you had to strike down your enemies to prevent a greater calamity. But each life taken weighed on her. Within hours, the fortress was secured. The battered defenders were either captured or fled. Arya's forces lost men, but far fewer than if they had attempted a frontal assault. She had minimized the bloodshed as best she could, yet every death still felt personal. She moved through the courtyard, offering words of comfort to the wounded, ensuring they received treatment. The storm raged on, but dawn broke through the clouds in thin rays. Back at camp, Tyrion and Davos greeted her with relief. Soldiers cheered quietly when they saw that their queen was safe. Arya did not join in. Her heart felt heavy. She went to her tent, stripped off her drenched armor, and stared at the wound on her arm, a shallow cut but still bleeding. A maester arrived to clean and stitch it, and Arya sat through the procedure with stoic silence. When it was done, she looked at her reflection in a small polished mirror. She saw not the little girl who used to run around Winterfell's courtyard, but a warrior queen with tired eyes and a haunted expression. She felt the weight of the crown she seldom wore. The question that rose in her mind was the same she had asked since the day she was crowned. How many more must die before Westeros truly finds peace? Despite the grief of that question, the outcome was clear. With the storm dragon defeated, her followers scattered, the threat of another Targaryen uprising faded. Over the next weeks, Arya oversaw the trials of those captured. She spared many, forcing them to take oaths of loyalty in exchange for clemency. A few who had committed grave atrocities were executed, not with pleasure but with the grim resolve of a ruler who must see justice done. And then she returned to King's Landing, the threat of civil war contained. In King's Landing, the news spread rapidly. Whispers that the Wolf Queen had personally defeated the Storm Dragon, that she had climbed cliffs in the midst of a storm, that she granted mercy to those who laid down their arms. These stories became legend overnight. It solidified Arya's hold on the throne, not by fear, but by respect. She had proven she was not a puppet monarch or a naive girl. She was a Stark, forged by battle and hardship, ready to do what must be done. The realm saw more months pass without serious strife. Reconstruction efforts continued. Trade flourished, especially after Dorne finally agreed to open its ports more fully, persuaded by Arya's promises of fair governance. The Iron Islands, too, decided to rejoin the Crown's alliance in exchange for certain freedoms of their own. Through careful negotiation and a willingness to give rather than just take, Arya brought the corners of Westeros into a looser but more sustainable unity. She also restructured the concept of the King's, or rather, the Queen's Council. She brought in not only lords and ladies, but also skilled representatives of the common folk, blacksmiths, healers, and scholars from the Citadel. She wanted a diversity of voices, believing that the realm needed more than just the aristocracy to define policy. This step caused consternation among many highborn families, but Arya refused to back down. "I did not come here to preserve the old ways," she said at one council meeting, her tone firm. "I came here to prevent more of our people from dying for the pride of a few." The changes were slow, and setbacks occurred. Corruption didn't vanish overnight. Some lords schemed, tested the boundaries of Arya's new policies. She learned who her true allies were and who would smile in her presence while plotting behind closed doors. But her presence remained a strong deterrent, and each time a plot unraveled, she dealt with it swiftly. Gradually, a new balance of power emerged, one that gave the people more voice and the lords enough incentive to remain loyal or at least grudgingly compliant. In the midst of all this, Arya found moments of solitude. Sometimes she would stroll along the battlements of the Red Keep late at night, looking out over the moonlit city. She recalled the moment Daenerys had perched her dragon upon these walls, the terror that followed. Now, the skies were empty of dragons. A part of Arya wondered if one day dragons might return in some distant age, perhaps under a more benevolent reign. But that was not her concern now. Her concern was the living, the realm that still trembled from old wounds. There were days she struggled with the role she had taken. She would catch herself longing for the open road, for the thrill of a quest, the quiet freedom of being no one. Those were the nights she visited the courtyard alone, practiced her sword forms until sweat beaded on her brow, reminding herself that she was still Arya Stark, not just a crowned figure in a hall of swords. She was the same girl who had once read stories of knights and heroes under covers, who had yearned to master the sword when others insisted she learn needlework. Some part of that girl still lived inside her, fueling her with a sense of purpose that went beyond titles and crowns. And perhaps it was that unbreakable thread of identity that made her beloved among those who lived and worked within the Red Keep. Servants whispered that she treated them kindly, listened to their troubles, sometimes even helped personally. Guards admired that she trained with them rather than simply issuing orders. Advisors found that when they spoke reason, she heeded it, and when they spoke nonsense, she cut through it with wit as sharp as needles tip. Years began to pass. King's Landing healed. Its once ruined districts were rebuilt and new structures rose, some paid for by the crown, others by wealthy merchants who found profit in the city's resurgence. A new generation grew up hearing stories of how Queen Arya ended the War for the Dawn, how she slew the Storm Dragon, and how she brought an unusual sense of fairness to an ancient seat of power. The small folk spoke of her in taverns and markets, sometimes praising her modest nature, sometimes telling fanciful tales about her shape-shifting into a wolf at night, stories that made children huddle with excitement. Arya herself aged, though not too greatly. The shadow of war receded from her face, replaced by a quiet solemnity. Whenever she had to pass sentence on criminals or quell a new squabble between fractious lords, she did it with a measured hand. She tried her best to instill in them that the realm could thrive if they worked together instead of fighting. On one particularly bright spring day, Arya was walking the gardens of the Red Keep, recently replanted with flowers from the Reach. Birdsong filled the air, and the sweet scent of blooming roses contrasted with the memory of scorched stone that still lingered in her mind. Tyrion found her among the hedgerows, a letter in hand. "You should read this," he said, offering the parchment. Arya's brow furrowed. She took it and opened the seal. It was from the far north, from Castle Black. Her eyes skimmed the words. Jon Snow had returned south of the Wall. He was near Winterfell, rumored to be in good health, perhaps even planning a visit. Her heart soared, a sensation that had grown unfamiliar. She remembered how she had parted from Jon after Daenerys' fall, how they had embraced, uncertain if they would ever see each other again. Now, perhaps, they would finally share a moment free of the burdens that had once weighed them. She told Tyrion to send a raven welcoming Jon to King's Landing, if he wished to come. A few weeks later, a reply arrived. Jon would come, though on his own time. Duty still called him in the north, as scattered bands of wildlings and northern tribes needed guidance. Yet he wished to see his youngest sister, to witness the realm she was shaping. When at last Jon arrived, the city turned out to watch. Though Jon had never been crowned anything other than king in the north, to many he was still a legendary figure. Whispers spread about the man who had slain his own queen. Some viewed him as a traitor, others as a tragic hero. But his arrival drew crowds nonetheless. Arya received him in the throne room, quiet anticipation making her fingertips tremble. Jon entered, dressed in dark furs, as though he had just left the Wall. He seemed older, hair streaked with early threads of gray, face weathered by the northern winds. But when his eyes met Arya's, he broke into a familiar, gentle smile. She stepped down from the dais, ignoring formalities, and embraced him. In that moment, they were no longer queen and visitor, but simply brother and sister. He bowed his head. "Your Grace," he said in a wry tone that made Arya grin. "Don't start," she teased. Then she sobered. "I'm glad you came." They walked the city together, guarded by a small retinue. Jon marveled at the rebuilding efforts, commenting on how different the city looked from when he had last seen it in flames and rubble. At Arya's request, Tyrion arranged a feast that evening, modest by royal standards but celebratory enough. Lords, ladies, and knights gathered to welcome the northern visitor who had done so much for the realm. During the feast, Jon recounted stories of the far north, how the free folk were settling, how ghostly lights danced across the night sky, how each year the memory of the dead army faded a little more. Arya listened with rapt attention, occasionally sharing her own tales of ensuring justice in King's Landing. The difference in their lives was stark, yet they had both found a kind of peace. She realized how far they had come since those dark days of war. After the feast, the siblings found themselves on a balcony overlooking the city, the warm night air carrying distant laughter and music. Jon leaned against the stone railing, gazing at the stars. "When I left," he said quietly, "I had no idea how you would fare. Now I see you've done more than just keep the peace. You've built something new." Arya shrugged modestly. "I had help, and it's not perfect. There's still conflict, but it's better than it was. I hope Father would be proud." Jon's gaze fell to the distant lights of the harbor. "He would be. You've given people more justice, more hope than they've known in a long time." He paused, as if wrestling with inner turmoil. "I never wanted any of this, Arya. Power, thrones, crowns. I'm glad it's you who took it, not me. She smirked. I never wanted it either. They shared a moment of quiet laughter. In that instant, all the burdens of leadership, all the ghosts of the past, felt a fraction lighter. Jon stayed for a few weeks. He sat in on some councils, offering insights from the perspective of the North. He spoke with Tyrion, Davos, and Brienne, all of whom welcomed him warmly. He observed how Arya ruled, listening to the pleas of common folk, orchestrating solutions, punishing those who harbored cruelty in their hearts. He saw that she did not shy away from drawing her sword, but that she also strove to find peaceful resolutions whenever possible. On the day of Jon's departure, they stood at the city gates. Will you return to Winterfell? Jon asked, stroking the neck of his horse. If only for a visit? Arya considered. Memories of Winterfell's godswood, of the swirling snow, of her room and the warmth of the hearth, flooded her mind. She missed it, but she also knew her duty might not allow her to leave King's Landing for extended periods, at least not yet. Someday, she promised, her hand resting lightly on Needle's hilt. When the realm no longer needs me here, when I found someone who can take my place, or at least share the burden. Jon nodded, expression filled with understanding. I'll keep the North safe for you then. He clasped her hand, gave it a gentle squeeze, and then mounted his horse, riding out amid cheers and farewells. Arya watched him go, a quiet ache in her chest, yet also comforted. He was alive. Sansa was in the North, building a just rule of her own. Bran was beyond all mortal concerns, presumably still the three-eyed raven. And she was here in King's Landing, forging a new chapter for Westeros. If their family had been shattered, it had also been reforged in unexpected ways. Each of them had taken on a piece of responsibility for the living, and each in their own way strove to honor Ned Stark's memory. The years that followed saw Arya's realm grow increasingly stable. Conflicts arose, rebellions flickered, but they were handled swiftly. Justice was not always gentle, but it was never arbitrary or cruel. Trade flourished, roads became safer, and the small folk began to have a say in local assemblies that Arya encouraged lords to form. The scars of Dragonfire gradually faded as new districts emerged, and though the Iron Throne remained a symbol of conquest, Arya rarely sat upon it, preferring a simpler seat of carved wood. Still, tradition demanded that sometimes she do so, and each time she felt the cold metal beneath her, she was reminded of the responsibility she bore. She ensured a new era of learning by inviting maesters to establish smaller citadels in major towns, opening education to more than just the nobility. She formed alliances with the free cities of Essos, negotiating trade pacts that benefited common merchants as much as wealthy traders. She even commissioned the building of new ships for a Westerosi fleet, not for war, but to protect trade routes and explore distant waters, continuing the tradition of discovering the unknown. A part of her that had once wanted to sail west of Westeros found solace in the idea that others might undertake those journeys. Occasionally, she had visitors from across the sea, merchants, envoys, travelers. Some claimed to know the horrors or wonders of Essos. Arya listened with intrigue but rarely indulged in daydreams. Her place was here for now. She had left the wide world once she realized how badly Westeros needed guidance. Maybe one day, when everything was settled, she might take a ship again, traveling beyond the sunset. But that day felt far away. As more time rolled on, her hair dusted with a few silver strands, lines of care etched her face. Yet she remained lithe, quick, and watchful, still trained daily to keep her skills sharp. The court recognized her as the Wolf Queen, a loyal, fierce, and untamed in spirit. She oversaw improvements in farmland, the rebuilding of old roads, and the fair distribution of taxes that weighed less heavily on the poor. Where once lords had wielded near-absolute power in their domains, now they answered to a monarch who believed that all people deserved a chance at justice. One crisp autumn morning, standing on a balcony overlooking a city dyed gold by the rising sun, Arya felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The wind carried the smell of baking bread and the promise of a fair day. She thought of her father, imagining how he might have guided the realm had he lived. She thought of her mother's fierce love, of Robb's lost cause, of Bran's strange path, and of Rickon's childhood innocence cut short by war. She thought of Jon and Sansa in the north, forging their own legacies. She remembered Gendry, who had found his place forging weapons for the crown but eventually chose to travel to the Westerlands, forging alliances as a new lord. She recalled the friends she had made and lost along the way, some living on in distant corners of Westeros, some in the memories that only she carried. She inhaled and closed her eyes, letting the cool breeze touch her face. She felt neither triumph nor sorrow, but a calm acceptance of the life she had chosen. She would never be a lady content with embroidery, nor would she be a faceless wanderer crossing seas in search of self. She was Arya Stark of Winterfell, the queen who had taken the Iron Throne not because she hungered for it, but because no one else could be trusted to wield power without becoming its slave. In the hush of that morning, with the city stirring awake, she thought of the journey that had led her here, a path paved with heartbreak, survival, bravery, and unwavering loyalty. She did not know if she would go down as a perfect ruler or if bards would sing her name for centuries. She only knew that she had tried to make Westeros safer, kinder, and freer than it had been before. The realm was healing and her people looked forward with hope instead of dread. That, she decided, was enough for now. She opened her eyes. Far below, a group of children ran through the streets, laughing, chasing each other, blissfully ignorant of the wars that had once raged here. It was, in many ways, the best reward she could have hoped for, seeing life continue without the shadow of dragonfire looming overhead. In time, historians would mark her reign as a peculiar one, different from the grandiose monarchies of Targaryen dragon lords or Baratheon conquerors. They would note how she had come from the north, how she had no thirst for power, and how she introduced reforms that shaped a fairer society. They would recount her personal feats with awe and curiosity, how the girl who had once been no one became the Wolf Queen who refused to let fear or greed guide her. Some would wonder if any queen after her could keep the realm so balanced, or if her style of leadership would fade into legend once she was gone. But for the people living under her rule, she was simply the Stark who sat on the Iron Throne, who listened to their pleas and guarded them like a wolf guarding its pack. Even as the realm stabilized, Arya never took her eyes off the horizon. She insisted on receiving regular reports from distant corners of the kingdom, sending her best knights and advisors where conflicts threatened to rise. She worked with maesters to address the root causes of famine in certain areas, sponsored the founding of new villages, and championed the rights of small folk to own their land. She welcomed travelers from Essos, forging new friendships that brought exotic goods and perspectives to Westeros. All of these measures were part of her effort to create a realm that would endure beyond her lifetime, that would not crumble the moment a new crisis emerged. She achieved this through resolve, compassion, and a ruthless streak when necessary. She could still kill without hesitation when faced with a threat to her people, but she found less satisfaction in violence. Each time she used her dagger, she remembered the face of the Storm Dragon, the twisted fanaticism of someone convinced they alone were righteous. Arya was determined not to let her rule become mired in blood. Rather, she strove to ensure that violence was a last resort, not a first solution. In the north, Sansa reported that the separate kingdom thrived under her leadership. They remained close allies, sister realms that shared open borders, trade, and mutual respect. The Vale and the Riverlands grew stronger as well, forging new bonds after decades of war. The Stormlands, though scarred by the recent rebellion, slowly rebuilt under new local leadership that sought Arya's counsel. The Reach continued as the breadbasket of the realm, its harvests feeding King's Landing and beyond. Dorne maintained its proud independence within the Confederation, trading spices and wines that enriched both sides. The Iron Islands, under a new generation of rulers, found that raiding was less profitable than honest trade. Through these alliances and changes, Westeros found itself on the cusp of a renaissance, a revival of culture, learning, and cooperation. And at the center of it all stood Arya Stark, shaped by a childhood of wolves and swordplay, honed by the darkest shadows of war, and uplifted by the love of family and the trust of her people. She was not a queen of dragons or wildfire, but of quiet determination and hard-earned respect. When bards sang of her, they told stories of a lithe warrior queen sneaking through enemy lines, of her defiance in the face of tyranny, of how she introduced laws that protected the weak. They spoke of her frequent visits to the orphanages she established, her personal interest in the well-being of her subjects, her firm but fair decrees that shaped a more just realm. She never carried the arrogance that so often came with the crown. Instead, she carried the memory of what it was like to be powerless and swore to shield others from that same feeling. If she had regrets, they were the quiet ones, that so many had died to bring her to this point, that some battles could not be won without losing a piece of herself. She occasionally had nightmares of old foes, of being a girl in King's Landing once more, cornered by the horrors of a city steeped in intrigue. But in her waking hours she was resolute, grounded by the conviction that she was shaping a better future than the one she had inherited. Ultimately, the story of Arya Stark on the Iron Throne was a testament to the idea that the best rulers are often those who do not crave power, but who accept it out of necessity, determined to wield it responsibly. She had taken the crown not to perpetuate the cycle of conquest and fear, but to break it. And in so doing, she brought the fractured realm closer to the ideals of peace and unity than it had been in many generations. So it went for many years. The seasons turned, the harvests came and went, and the houses of Westeros found themselves in a new age. Some still whispered that another dragon might appear or that a hidden prince might lay claim to the throne, but as time passed, those murmurs diminished. People grew content under the Wolf Queen's rule. They felt seen, heard, and protected. They dreamed not of war, but of building families, farms, and fortunes. In the quiet halls of the Red Keep, where kings and queens had once plotted unspeakable deeds, there now resonated an air of cautious optimism. And whenever Arya Stark strode through those corridors, short in stature, dressed in practical attire, a sword at her hip, courtiers bowed not merely out of tradition, but out of genuine respect. Perhaps the greatest testament to her reign was the simple fact that children in King's Landing slept soundly at night, unafraid of dragonfire or the thunder of marching armies. It was a small thing, but in the histories of Westeros, such peace was a rarity to be cherished. And so, despite the many battles, the heartbreaks, and the sacrifices along the way, Arya Stark's tenure on the Iron Throne brought about what countless rulers before her had promised but never delivered. A chance for true healing, and a hope that the realm might finally escape its cycle of blood and ashes. And so the Wolf Queen reigned, remembered by her people not as an untouchable deity in a high tower, but as one of them, a girl who had once walked the roads with nothing but a sword named Needle and a fierce desire for justice. She honored her promises, protected her subjects, and guided Westeros toward a gentler future. In the end, she proved that sometimes the fate of a broken world is best entrusted to those who have known what it is to lose everything, and who fight not for power, but to make sure no one else must endure the same heartbreak ever again. Over the next several years, the city of King's Landing underwent a transformation so profound that many who had fled the capital during the wars scarcely recognized it upon their return. The Wolf Queen's reforms had taken root in ways both visible and subtle. Sprawling marketplaces boomed with trade, entire neighborhoods had been rebuilt with cleaner streets and sturdier homes, and at night the city watch, now better trained and strictly overseen, patrolled diligently to protect rather than terrorize. Builders, masons, and carpenters found steady work, erecting new arches and townhouses in place of charred, skeletal ruins. Public squares echoed with minstrels' tunes and merchants hawking goods from all corners of Westeros and beyond. Though the scars of the past had not vanished completely, here and there, a blackened patch of stone or a fragment of a collapsed wall still whispered old sorrows. The city glimmered with a cautious optimism. Arya herself felt that hope like the first gentle warmth after a long winter. In the Red Keep, she no longer woke each morning expecting a sword at her throat or a new war on the horizon, yet she remained ever watchful. The crown she had taken out of necessity still sat in her chambers, little used except on formal occasions. Usually she wore her simple leathers or a well-fitted tunic, the signet ring of the Stark direwolf on her finger. She liked that ring better than any crown. It felt closer to who she was, a daughter of the North shaped by harsh lessons, a queen who never truly hungered for power. In the open courts she continued to hold, commoners spoke of irrigation problems in outlying farmland or bemoaned disputes with overbearing minor lords. Arya listened as carefully as she had the first day she'd received petitions, scribbling notes in her neat, unadorned script. She prided herself on the consistency of her judgments. When there were injustices, she acted firmly, unconcerned with whose pride she might bruise. The lords of Westeros had learned that the Wolf Queen's justice was neither fickle nor for sale. That reputation was half the reason the realm had seen no major rebellions since the Storm Dragon's bloody insurrection had been quashed. Most who might have hoped to seize power recognized that Arya was not a queen to be easily toppled. Her authority lay not only in her name or her sword arm, but also in the gratitude and trust of the common folk. She spent her early mornings training with the sword or dagger, much as she had in youth. Some courtiers whispered in confusion or mild disapproval, why should a queen need to maintain such martial skill? Yet others, especially the city's new watchmen, took pride in seeing her out on the dusty courtyard at dawn, practicing her footwork and parries. It reminded them that she had bled for this kingdom and would bleed again if necessary. Even after years of rule, Arya felt the old restlessness stirring now and then, the wanderer in her, the girl who had once dreamed of undiscovered lands west of Westeros. But each time she caught the glimmer of that longing, she tempered it with the knowledge that she still had work to do here, roads to improve, alliances to maintain, a people who looked to her for steadiness. The realm was safer than it had been in generations, but it was not yet unshakable. Her council had also evolved over time. Tyrion still served as Hand of the Queen, though gray had crept into his hair at the temples and lines of experience etched his face. His voice carried a tempered cynicism balanced by a persistent spark of idealism that Arya appreciated. Davos Seaworth handled trade and shipping matters in an official capacity, having proven himself time and again as a canny negotiator. Brienne of Tarth remained a constant presence, though often out leading patrols on the roads or mentoring the city watch, ensuring that peace was kept in every district of King's Landing. The small council had also gained a few new faces: Alice Rivers, a talented healer and apothecary who had risen from the ranks of commoners to direct efforts on public health, and Ser Garrett Tyrell, a younger knight from Highgarden who had impressed Arya with his level-headed approach to the complexities of taxation and infrastructure. Together, they tackled the daily tasks of governance and planned for the future of a realm still mending from war. Talk of fresh challenges, however, hovered on the horizon like dark clouds. A few years into her reign, murmurs reached King's Landing of renewed tensions with Bravos and the Free Cities. Ships from the Narrow Sea reported an increase in pirates and mercenaries preying on merchant vessels. More ominously, rumors circulated that the Iron Bank had grown uneasy about the realm's shifting power dynamics. Under Arya's new policies, the crown's debts were being repaid steadily but with tougher scrutiny, and the bank, ever watchful, did not relish losing even the smallest measure of influence. Tyrion once remarked wryly that the Iron Bank hated unpredictability more than it hated delayed repayment. Arya, not eager to let foreign financiers meddle in her realm's stability, insisted on forthright negotiations. The crown would honor past agreements but would not accept political intrusion. She suspected the Iron Bank would bide its time, looking for leverage. Another point of tension lay in the shadows of Essos. Stories filtered in from traveling merchants of some Targaryen loyalists who had sought refuge across the sea, individuals too zealous to integrate peacefully into any of the free cities. Dispossessed lords or aging knights craving the old illusions of dragonfire and crowns might form the core of a new threat if they found leadership or coin. One name in particular made the rounds in taverns and harbor markets: Rhaegar Sand. A bastard rumored to have Targaryen blood on his mother's side. No one could confirm if the man even existed, but the whispered legends grew more elaborate with every telling. Some said he was a ferocious swordsman with a dangerous gift for swaying crowds. Arya paid these rumors attention but not alarm. One rebellion led by a false dragon had already been put down. If another rose, she would meet it as she had before, swiftly and without fear. She lived with these undercurrents of unease, addressing them through patient diplomacy and vigilance. When she turned her gaze north, she found more comforting news. Sansa had become so deeply entwined in her role as queen in the north that a foreign observer might have believed she was born for the position. Winterfell thrived. New alliances with the clans of the northern mountains brought stability, and Sansa's fairness and cunning had earned her broad respect. The icy roads, once only for the hardiest travelers, were better maintained now, with watchtowers built at intervals so that travelers in winter had somewhere to shelter and trade caravans could move more freely. Occasionally, Arya and Sansa exchanged letters that straddled the line between warm sisterly chatter and royal discourse. Arya always ended her letters with a hope to visit soon, though the demands of her crown had so far kept that visit perpetually delayed. Jon Snow, for his part, remained mostly beyond the wall, coming south only when it suited him or when Sansa called upon him for matters requiring his presence. Reports spoke of him forging a strange peace between the surviving free folk and the men of the Night's Watch. With winter receding, the wilderness offered new land for the free folk to settle. Jon, it seemed, had found his own calling beyond the borders of what was now Arya's domain. Yet every so often a raven arrived bearing news of his well-being, and sometimes quietly a mention that he might travel south once more. One crisp evening, 3 years into what many were calling the Wolf Queen's golden peace, Arya was in her solar, poring over trade manifests from the Iron Islands and the Lannister-held western ports. The wind outside rattled the shutters. A single lantern lit the chamber, leaving the corners in shadow. She wore a plain tunic of dark green, her hair braided back. Nita lay on a table nearby, half buried by scrolls. She was lost in thought when a knock sounded on the door. Tyrion entered, bearing a fresh letter sealed with thick red wax. "This arrived not an hour ago, Your Grace," he said, offering the parchment. "From Braavos, though it's not marked by the Iron Bank or any official seal. The messenger claims to have crossed the sea specifically to deliver this to you." Arya set aside the trade manifests and broke the seal. The letter was written in a bold, flowing hand and addressed her simply by name, dispensing with any royal titles. As she read, her features hardened. The writer claimed to be of the House of Black and White, the faceless men whom Arya had long ago departed. The letter's tone was polite yet laden with threat. It acknowledged Arya's station but reminded her of old debts, choices she had made when she took the identity of no one and then reclaimed her name. While it did not openly demand her abdication or cast direct blame, it warned that some in Braavos whispered her name among the unsettled. The message ended with a cryptic phrase. "The many-faced god has long memory." Tyrion watched her carefully. "Concerning news, I take it," he said, noticing the slight twitch in her jaw. Arya exhaled a slow breath and folded the letter. "The House of Black and White, the faceless men. They haven't stirred since before I returned to Westeros. But now they reach out. Or perhaps this is just one of them. Hard to say." Tyrion's gaze flicked to her sword on the table, as if recalling all the half-spoken tales of Arya's training among the assassins of Braavos. "Are they seeking gold? Influence? Or merely reminding you that no one escapes their oath?" She gave a half-shake of her head. "They're not like Sel's words. They have their own codes, their own devotions. They don't fear kings or queens. If they wanted me dead, they'd make the attempt without sending a warning." Her eyes fell to the letter again. "But they want me to know they're watching, or that someone among them is." That night, Arya found sleep slow to come. In her bedchamber, she stared at the flickering candle and remembered the endless corridors of the House of Black and White, the silent priests who served the many-faced god, the slithering presence of hidden faces in the darkness. She recalled how, in her youth, she had believed she could cast off her identity entirely to become one of them. In time, she realized her roots as a Stark ran too deep for that, and so she had left, forging her own path. Yet that path had not ended in anonymity but upon the Iron Throne. A turn of fate the faceless men surely did not ignore. Over the subsequent weeks, reports trickled in that a handful of Braavosi had been seen skulking about the docks of King's Landing, asking strange questions. Arya ordered the city watch to remain vigilant but keep a low profile. She had no intention of hosting a witch hunt against foreigners. King's Landing thrived precisely because it welcomed traders and travelers from faraway lands. But she also refused to let the presence of possible assassins go unmonitored. Brienne doubled the guards around the Red Keep. Tyrion, uneasy with the intangible nature of the threat, advised that they hold a discreet meeting with Braavosi envoys and glean more information. Around that time, another blow fell. Word came that a pirate fleet had begun terrorizing merchant vessels in the Stepstones, interfering with shipments from the Narrow Sea. Merchant guilds appealed to the crown for protection, citing new raids that threatened to disrupt the city's lifeblood of trade. Since the end of the last major war, trade had become the realm's backbone. Farmers, artisans, and merchants relied on it. Reconstruction demanded materials from across the sea. Tyrion suspected that these pirates might be more than opportunists. He warned Arya that if the Iron Bank or any other power in Braavos was behind them, financing them or at least turning a blind eye, this could be a ploy to weaken the crown's position. Faced with the possibility of Braavosi interference from multiple angles, Arya resolved to respond decisively. She called a meeting of her small council. The chamber was warm with torchlight and a map of the Stepstones spread across the table. Her counselors stood around, eyes tracing shipping lanes that dotted the watery routes. "This must be dealt with," she said, her voice carrying the quiet steel they recognized well. "We can't let the realm's main supply lines be strangled." Ser Garrett Tyrell, the official overseeing taxes and infrastructure, frowned at the map. "Raising a fleet takes time, Your Grace. We do have ships, but not nearly as many as the old royal fleets. We'd need to commission new warships if we plan to fully secure those lanes." Davos rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "We can't wait that long. We should send a strong escort with the next merchant flotilla, enough to repel or discourage these raiders. If our show of force teaches them, we might buy time to build more ships." Arya nodded. "We'll do both. Put out the call for shipwrights from the Iron Islands and the Arbor. Let them know the Crown is prepared to pay well for swift construction. Meanwhile, gather every seaworthy vessel loyal to the Crown. Arm them. I want at least a small fleet sailing to the Stepstones as soon as possible." Tyrion folded his hands, tension bracketing his mouth. This will be expensive and might provoke a response if Braavos is indeed involved. Arya regarded him levelly. If Braavos is behind these pirates, then they've already committed an act of aggression. I won't let the realm's well-being hang on whether the Iron Bank is pleased with us. The next step is to find out the truth. It was decided. Over the next month, Davos spearheaded efforts to assemble a squadron of ships, some crown-owned, others chartered from private captains promised hefty payments. Weapons were loaded and loyal knights prepared to sail south. At the same time, Arya orchestrated a meeting in King's Landing with a high-ranking official from Braavos, a magister named Cererio Sereth. Known for his silver tongue and flamboyant style, Cererio arrived accompanied by a small retinue, stepping off a Braavosi galley that moored in Blackwater Bay. In the throne room, under the watchful eye of the guards, Arya received Cererio. He was a thin man, dressed in layered silks of pale green and gray, his black hair oiled back. He bowed with the elaborate courtesy of his city and smiled as though certain he could charm the Wolf Queen with well-chosen words. "I bring cordial greetings from the Sea Lord of Braavos, Your Grace," he began, employing his theatrical flourish. "We admire the rebuilding of your city and wish for continued friendship and trade." Arya spared him the barest courtesy of a nod. "Then perhaps you can explain why Braavosi raiders, or those allied to them, harass our ships near the Stepstones. And while you're at it, explain why the House of Black and White is sending veiled threats to my doorstep." A flicker crossed the Magister's face, too quick for most to spot, but Arya caught it. She had learned to read the subtlest of signals. Cererio's smile tightened. "Braavos is a free city, Your Grace. Many folk come and go. Some may call themselves Braavosi but act outside our laws. We disavow piracy, of course, and the Iron Bank would strongly discourage any official Braavosi involvement in such crimes. As for the House of Black and White, no one in Braavos presumes to control them. They are an ancient order devoted to their god. If they've taken an interest in you, it's an interest not easily dissuaded by any magistrate or sea lord." His reply was as evasive as Arya had expected. "Still," she pressed him, "but the city of Braavos enforces some rule of law, does it not? If these pirates operate openly, then you must know something." Cererio affected a wounded air. "We have heard rumors, as you have, but no proof that these criminals sail under our banner. Braavos would be willing to send representatives to investigate further. Perhaps we can coordinate an effort to suppress these raids. Let us keep the peace, Your Grace. There is profit for all in stability." Watching him, Arya recognized he was no common liar. He was a polished diplomat practiced in feeding half-truths. She traded more formalities with him, gleaning little in the way of hard facts, but she let him believe he had charmed her enough to maintain negotiations. Better to keep him talking than send him away angry or suspicious. Later, in private council, Arya made her stance clear: they won't openly confess to anything. "We'll proceed with strengthening our naval presence. If this is a test by Braavos to see how far they can push, then let's show them we're not easily intimidated. If the House of Black and White is a separate threat, I'll deal with it." She placed a hand on the hilt of her Valyrian steel dagger. "One way or another." Within weeks, the first flotilla sailed south under Davos's direction. They aimed to escort vital cargo ships and, if possible, smoke out the pirates who had been harassing the seas. Arya remained behind to manage the realm, continuing her daily duties, but her mind often wandered to the Stepstones, imagining the swirl of storms and the clang of battle at sea. She trusted Davos's leadership and the grit of the knights and sailors, but she knew how unpredictable the ocean could be and how dangerous unknown alliances were. Not long after the ships departed, the second threat materialized. Brienne burst into Arya's study one evening, her face grim, to report that a strangled corpse had been found near the city's northern gate, one of Arya's traveling messengers returning from the Vale. A coin of the faceless men lay placed on his chest. The city watch was rattled. The killer had left no other clues. No footprints, no sightings of suspicious figures. The murder was a message as blatant as it was cold. Arya felt a slow burn rise in her. She had tried to separate her rule from the lethal cunning she'd learned as a child, believing that if she governed fairly, she might not need to rely on the darker arts again. But the House of Black and White did not adhere to reason or pleas for negotiation. If they had accepted a contract against her or simply judged that she was an oathbreaker, they might send killers until they achieved their aim. She recalled the quiet halls of that temple, the black pool reflecting the pillars, the faces stored in the catacombs. No fortress walls, no city watch could entirely deter a faceless man. The danger lay not in open confrontation but in the terrifying possibility that any face could hide an assassin. She called a meeting of her closest advisors in a secure chamber. The servants were dismissed, the doors barred, guards posted. Tyrion, Brienne, and Alice Rivers stood at a small table strewn with the meager evidence. The coin that had been left on the victim's body glinted dully by lantern light. "This is their warning," Arya said, her voice pitched low. "They want me to know that no one is untouchable. If I remain in King's Landing, I'm a fixed target. I won't cower in my chamber, but I can't ignore the threat." Brienne's large hands clenched. "There must be a way to defend you more thoroughly. Double the guard. Lock down the castle. No one in or out without thorough inspection." Arya shook her head. "That won't stop them. A faceless man can be anyone, a guard, a servant, a visiting noble. They could steal any face, any identity, slip through unseen. If the city is locked down too tightly, we'll crush morale. And it might not save me anyway." Tyrion exhaled, looking troubled. "You once told me a little about your training, though I suspect you spared me the worst details. If that knowledge can help us now, you should use it." Her jaw tightened. Memories of the blind training, the constant tests, the punishing rites flickered behind her eyes. "I know how they think, how they plan," she said slowly. "They rely on infiltration and patience. They study their targets' routines and vulnerability. Ties. But they also revere finality. When they fix on a target, they do not relent." She paused, wrestling with an unspoken idea. A direct confrontation might be the only way to end this. Hiding behind guards won't dissuade them. Brienne looked aghast at the notion. "You would face them alone?" Arya lifted her chin. "I would. Because if I rely solely on conventional defenses, innocent people around me will die. They already have. The City Watch can't protect every messenger, every servant, every official. The faceless men will murder those close to me to weaken my resolve until I yield or fall into a trap. I refuse to let them wage that kind of campaign." Tyrion considered her words carefully. "What do you propose, then?" She blew out a breath as though steeling herself. "I may need to go to Bravos." The idea shocked them. They launched a chorus of protests. What about the realm, the precarious situation with the pirates, the fact that some hidden Bravosi faction might be orchestrating all this? But Arya explained her reasoning. The House of Black and White might only relent if she dealt with them at the source, confronted them on their own ground. Remaining in King's Landing simply meant bracing for the next silent strike, the next corpse left as a warning. Meanwhile, the realm would unravel under fear. She believed that her presence in Bravos, if handled carefully, might allow her to negotiate or, if negotiation failed, to force a decisive conflict away from innocent bystanders. "But you're the queen," Brienne insisted. "If you leave now, how will the people see it? Will they think you're fleeing?" Arya met Brienne's worried gaze. "I'm not fleeing. I'm taking the fight to its origin. Besides, I have a capable council to govern in my absence. If we present this openly, that I'm going abroad to secure a lasting peace with Bravos, most will accept it. And Sansa can be summoned to hold the regency if necessary, or she can send an envoy. You all know how to handle the day-to-day. Tyrion will see that no opportunist tries to seize the throne while I'm away." Tyrion gave a short laugh. "That's one way to keep me busy." "Very well, if you insist. But you'll need a guard." "Brienne should go." Arya forestalled him with a slight lift of her hand. "No. 1 guard, 10 guards, or 50 won't matter if a faceless man decides to strike. And a large retinue will only draw more attention. This has to be done quietly. I'll travel with a small company, 1 or 2 loyal souls, no more. I won't bring ships bristling with soldiers into Bravosi waters. That would be seen as provocation. I'll sail as a diplomat, unarmed in the eyes of the world, though we'll both know that's not strictly true." She glanced at her Valyrian steel dagger. Brienne pressed her lips into a thin line, anger mixing with concern. "Then let me at least accompany you. If something goes wrong, you'll need one person at your side who'll never yield." Arya considered it. There was no one she trusted more with her life than Brienne. And yet, bringing Brienne, so tall and unmistakable, might hamper stealth. But perhaps it was wise to have a single companion, and Brienne was unshakably loyal, a fighter of proven worth. "Very well," Arya said at last. "But we travel lightly with minimal ceremony." "Understood." Brienne bowed her head. "Understood." Arrangements were made quickly and discreetly. Tyrion would act as hand of the queen with near-absolute authority in Arya's absence. Davos, upon returning from the Stepstones, would continue to manage naval matters. A letter was dispatched to Winterfell informing Sansa that Arya would be out of the capital for some time, traveling to Braavos to handle an urgent threat to the realm's security. Sansa's reply arrived swiftly. She expressed deep worry but pledged her support. If required, she would come south or send a trusted regent to assist Tyrion in the capital. Within a fortnight, a Braavosi ship was quietly chartered by the Crown, the Stormrunner, a sturdy vessel whose captain had previously worked with Davos. Under cover of night, Arya boarded with Brienne, one hand on the hilt of Needle, the other clutching a small bag of personal possessions. No heralds announced her departure, no cheering crowds lined the docks. She left King's Landing behind in the hush of darkness, with only a few faithful guards seeing her off. Tyrion watched from the quay, arms crossed, worry etched into the lines around his eyes. Arya caught his gaze and offered the slightest nod, then the gangplank was raised and the Stormrunner slipped out onto the black waters of Blackwater Bay, guided by meager lanterns. The voyage across the narrow sea proved tense but mercifully uneventful. Stormrunner's crew treated Arya with respect, though they seemed aware something weighty hung over this journey. Brienne kept a silent watch from the deck, scanning each passing vessel. Arya's mind churned as she leaned against the ship's rail, the salt wind tugging her braids. She stared at the horizon and wondered if the many-faced god was watching, if old memories of the House of Black and White would come to greet her like ghosts. On the 12th day at sea, they sighted the Titan of Braavos. Its massive stone visage loomed over the mouth of the lagoon, Warhorn at the ready. Arya felt a pull of emotion at the sight. This city had once been her refuge, a place where she tried to shed her identity. Now, she returned as Arya Stark, Wolf Queen, an entirely different form of power at her back. The ship glided between the Titan's legs, entering the vast lagoon dotted with countless canal-laced islands. Braavos spread before them, a maze of waterways, tall spires, and arched bridges. Lanterns glimmered like fireflies along the canals, reflecting in the dark waters. Even by day, the city carried a certain mystery. They docked at a quiet wharf. The captain, paid to keep a low profile, said little as Arya and Brienne disembarked. Both wore hooded cloaks to avoid drawing attention. A pair of Braavosi port officials lazily checked the cargo, unimpressed by the smallness of the expedition. If they recognized Arya, they gave no sign. Perhaps news had not yet reached the city that the Wolf Queen was arriving. That suited Arya just fine. She had chosen an inconspicuous inn near the Iron Bank's Grand Building in a district known for its moderate crowds, enough passers-by to remain anonymous, not so many that they risked immediate detection by spies. They took 2 modest rooms on the upper floor, each with a single cot and a window overlooking a canal. The innkeeper, a rotund Braavosi woman with heavy-lidded eyes, gave them keys without fuss. Brienne insisted on inspecting the rooms thoroughly before allowing Arya to set foot inside, half expecting an assassin behind every curtain. Finding nothing suspicious, she let Arya settle in. That evening, Arya ventured out in her cloak, leaving Brienne behind with strict instructions to remain hidden and alert. She had changed into simpler clothes, reminiscent of the days she was no one. Slipping among the Braavosi crowds, she felt something old stir within her. The city had not changed much, hawkers calling out by the canals, the pungent smell of brine and fish, the hush of narrower alleys where footsteps echoed. She made her way to a small courtyard near the Purple Harbor, one she recalled from her time as a beggar under the tutelage of the Faceless Men. Leaning against a weathered pillar, she observed the passers-by. A cluster of masked performers practiced a pantomime in the street, their lively gestures at odds with the creeping dusk. She recognized no one in particular, but the city's pulse felt familiar. Keeping her hood low, she drifted through side streets, ears tuned for any mention of the House of Black and White. Eventually, she paused at a canal where gondoliers called out to potential riders. She hired one, stepping into the narrow boat. The gondolier, a wiry old man with a reedy voice, set off across the calm water. "Where to?" he asked. She hesitated only briefly. "To the House of Black and White." A momentary flicker of unease crossed the old man's face, but he masked it. "That temple is closed to most, my lady. Do you wish to pray or to die?" Arya's heart tightened at the litany of the Braavosi. "I come to settle a debt." He nodded, saying nothing more, and rowed in silence. Moonlight danced on the rippling canal. They passed rowboats, floating shops, and silent mansions shuttered for the night. After a time, the gondolier turned into a quieter channel. The water stilled. Ahead, Arya saw the dark shape of the temple's facade as she remembered it, plain, unadorned, half black stone, half white, overshadowed by an almost tangible gloom. The gondolier docked at the narrow steps that led up to the temple's entrance. No one stood guard, yet Arya sensed the presence of watchers. She paid the man, stepped onto the steps, and watched as he faded away into the darkness of the canal, leaving her alone with the hush of the night. Slowly, she climbed the steps, the memory of them so vivid she could almost see her younger self approaching in rags. Then she had come seeking answers and power. Now she came seeking an end. The doors opened soundlessly, just as she remembered. Inside, the faint smell of still water and old stone lingered. A single torch burned in a bracket on the wall, its light dancing across the dark pool at the center of the hall. Columns rose into shadows. The temple was empty of worshippers, or so it seemed. Arya walked forward, footsteps echoing. She peered at the water's surface, reflecting half her face in the torchlight. The place stirred a dozen recollections of being blind, of sweeping floors, of the waif who tormented her, of Jaqen Hagar's cryptic instructions. She called out, voice subdued but firm, "I am Arya Stark. I come to speak with whoever claims a debt upon me. Show yourself." For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, from the gloom beyond the columns, a figure stepped forth. Robed in black and white, face utterly calm, an older woman with shorn gray hair. Her eyes glinted like polished stones. Arya did not recognize her face, though that meant nothing. Faceless men wore many masks. "We know who you are," said the woman, voice low, echoing across the marble. "The many-faced God sees all. You stand before the temple once again, child who was no one, child who was all names. Now a queen. Quite the transformation." Arya steadied her breathing. "You've killed one of my people in Westeros. You've threatened others. I want to know why." The woman's lips curved slightly, neither a smile nor a sneer. "You left your training. You took names back when you had vowed to give them up. You used the gifts of the faceless men to carve your own path. The house has not forgotten. There is a contract pending. A promise that your life is owed, or a redemption of the slight. Only the many-faced God can release a debt unfulfilled." Arya exhaled. So it was as she feared. Someone had indeed placed a contract on her, perhaps from the day she had reclaimed her identity. Or the temple itself demanded retribution for her apostasy. She forced her voice to remain steady. "Then let's settle it. I'm here now. No more bloodshed of innocence." The woman stepped closer, her robe whispering on the floor. She extended a hand, palm up. "One life must pay for the broken oath, or the debt transforms. You hold power now, but to the many-faced God, you remain a single mortal among countless. Will you offer your life willingly?" Arya saw the flicker of torches in the woman's eyes. The question hung in the air. She realized with a surge of clarity that the temple might demand an impossible choice, her life or the lives of those around her. Yet she also recalled the nature of bargains made in this place. The faceless men could, under certain conditions, be bargained with. They dealt in death, but they acknowledged equivalences. There were ways to redirect the gift, to pay a debt in a different currency, though it was never easy, never clean. She steadied herself. "My life is not only my own anymore," she said. "It belongs to the realm, and I won't hand it over to you. But the House of Black and White has always revered balance. You kill for coin, for cause, for the God who demands a price. If a life is needed, is there no other offering I can give?" The woman's brow furrowed ever so slightly. "Such questions are dangerous. The many-faced God's justice is not a marketplace for haggling." Arya clenched her jaw. "Yet you accept gold for contracts. You measure the worth of a life in coin. Maybe there's a coin large enough to cover my debt." She paused. "Or a name to offer that would please your God more than mine." From the columns, movement flickered. A second figure stepped out, a man with an ageless face, wearing the same black and white robes. His voice cut softly through the hush, a name of great significance, a soul that the many-faced God yearns for. "You would offer this name in place of yours? Beware that you do not deliver an innocent soul. The God requires balance, not tyranny." Arya remembered the list of enemies she'd once carried in her heart, but that list had long since shrunk. She refused to deliver an innocent or orchestrate some petty revenge. Even so, she realized that in the last few years, a handful of truly malevolent forces had disrupted the realm, threatened her people, and might do so again. Someone whose death would both satisfy the temple's code and protect Westeros from future harm. She recalled the rumors of Rhaegar Sand, the self-styled Targaryen loyalist rumored to be rallying exiled zealots in Essos. Could he be the one? Or was he merely rumor? Another name rose in her mind. She had learned from Tyrion that certain slavers in Volantis had begun capturing refugees from the western coasts, selling them in the disputed lands. Such monstrous figures might be a fitting offering if the temple recognized them as worthy. But would that be enough to fully cancel her debt? She inhaled quietly. "Give me time," she said. I'll find a name that means more to the many-faced god than mine." A cold hush followed. Then the man nodded. "We are patient. You have 1 moon's turn to bring us a name and the means to deliver that life. If you fail, the debt reverts to you, and all who stand in our way shall suffer." Arya found her pulse pounding. The House of Black and White dealt in absolutes. She had only a short time to find a target they deemed equal or greater in worth than a queen who had spurned their ways. She gave the slightest inclination of her head a bow of sorts. Then, without further words, she stepped back from the pool, turned, and left. The temple doors whispered shut behind her. Outside, she found the gondolier gone. She walked the deserted street alone, the cool Braavosi air chilling her skin. She swallowed, fear clawing at her insides, but beneath that fear blazed determination. There had to be a way. If the House of Black and White was so eager to claim her life, they might accept a more potent life in exchange. Someone who embodied an offense to the many-faced god so great that it outweighed Arya's broken oath. She returned to the inn, where Brienne paced the corridor, worry sharpening her gaze. "You were gone for hours. Were you followed?" Arya shook her head. "No, but we have a deadline. 1 moon's turn to give them another life or face their wrath." Brienne's eyes widened in alarm. "Another life? I have to find someone truly deserving of the faceless men's attention," Arya explained grimly. "A name that resonates with them. A life they'd consider a fitting offering. If we can do that, they might let me go. If not..." She let the words trail off. Brienne's mouth set in a hard line. "This is monstrous. Trading 1 death for another." Arya stared at the flickering candle on the small table. "You think I haven't thought of that? But if I don't give them a name, they'll kill me and half the people around me. And the realm will be plunged into chaos. I won't allow that. I need to choose carefully. Someone who has spilled blood wantonly, who stands in defiance of the many-faced god's own decrees, or one who owes a greater debt of death. That's how they work." Brienne sank onto a stool, removing her sword belt with a sigh. "Then we'd best hurry. Do you have any leads?" "One," Arya admitted. "A rumor of a man named Rhaegar Sand, claiming Targaryen ties, said to gather forces in Essos. Or a powerful slaver in Volantis who's rumored to deal with the darkest corners of black magic and cruelty. I need more information." They spent the next days quietly meeting contacts in Braavos. Merchants, dockworkers, a few dubious rogues, for news of Rhaegar Sand. Most leads were contradictory. Some said he was in Lys, others swore he was in Pentos. A few claimed he commanded a small army of sellswords, burning villages and enslaving the inhabitants. Arya listened with a neutral mask, sorting real clues from outlandish fabrications. She wanted to be certain he posed a genuine threat. If he did, then offering him to the House of Black and White could rid the realm of a looming menace. But time slipped by with minimal progress. Messengers from the Stormrunner brought updates that Davos had engaged pirates in a vicious skirmish near the Stepstones. The Crown's flotilla had triumphed in one battle, sinking at least 3 pirate ships, though a greater fleet might still lurk. Meanwhile, tension with the Iron Bank remained unresolved, and Tyrion wrote that Cererio Sereth continued to hover around the capital, making vague overtures. Arya worried that her absence might embolden troublemakers at home, yet she had no choice but to continue her search. At last, a break came from a Braavosi coin seller who claimed to have overheard 2 Lyseni merchants discussing Rhaegar Sand over spiced wine. According to this rumor, the would-be Targaryen zealot had recently occupied a fortress on an island off the coast of Lys, demanding tribute from passing ships and threatening to bring fire and blood to the Wolf Queen. Arya seized on the tale. If it was true, Rhaegar Sand was not only a menace but one specifically seeking her downfall. A perfect candidate for an offering to the faceless men if she could confirm his presence and identity. Brienne argued for caution. This might be a trap. The House of Black and White knows we're searching for a name. They could be guiding us into a snare. Arya nodded grimly. It could be, but we have no better lead and time is running short. I'll go to Lys, see if this fortress is real. If Rhaegar Sand is who they say, I'll gather the evidence the faceless men need. Then it's up to them to do the rest or let me do it. They prepared to depart Braavos by hiring a small Lyseni merchant ship disguised as standard travelers seeking passage. Before leaving, Arya made one last trip to the House of Black and White. This time, she only ascended the temple steps to slip a note under the door, stating that she had found a name that might be worthy. She gave no details but declared she would return with proof before the moon's turn was over. The silent temple offered no response. The door remained closed, and Arya found herself wondering if watchers peered from the darkness within. They set sail at dawn. Brienne insisted on keeping watch in case an assassin tried to board the ship unawares. The crossing to Lys took less than a week with favorable winds. As they neared the southern seas, the air grew warmer, the scent of salt and strange spices drifting on the breeze. Lys itself rose on the horizon in a haze of white walls and golden domes, famed for its pleasure, houses and graceful architecture. But Arya and Brienne did not linger in the city. Instead, they asked the captain to deposit them at a smaller port to the east, a rougher place known for trade in exotic creatures and questionable deals. Word on the docks spoke of an island fortress about a day's sail from the coast, newly occupied by a band of Westerosi exiles and sells words. The locals cursed them for extorting fees from fishing vessels, but none dared openly defy them. The group's leader was rumored to be a tall man with silver hair and a dragon banner. Arya's pulse quickened at these stories. If Rhaegar Sand was indeed there, and if he threatened Westeros, she might have her answer for the House of Black and White. They secured a small fishing boat after considerable haggling. Brienne grumbled at the craft's questionable seaworthiness, but it was the least conspicuous way to reach the island. At dusk, they set off. The fishermen at the helm muttered that the waters around that island were patrolled by cutthroats. If they saw a bigger ship approach, they'd seize it or sink it. A tiny fishing boat, however, might slip by unnoticed if they kept their lanterns doused. Night fell, the sea calm. Clouds drifted over the moon. Arya and Brienne stood at the bow scanning the horizon. After some hours, they glimpsed a flicker of torchlight on a rocky outcrop, the fortress. It perched on a crag above the waves, illuminated by braziers along the ramparts. The faint shape of a Targaryen-style banner fluttered in the wind. The fisherman cut the sail and whispered that this was as close as he dared go. Arya nodded and motioned for him to wait while she and Brienne slipped overboard into a small rowboat. They rowed the remaining distance in tense silence, each quiet splash of the oars sounding too loud in their ears. They landed on a narrow pebble beach beneath the fortress cliffs. From there, they climbed a winding goat path that rose sharply among jagged rocks. Arya recalled her infiltration of the Storm Dragon's fortress years before, but this time she was older, more measured. The darkness was her ally. Brienne's armor was muffled by cloth wrappings to keep it from clinking. They moved slowly, carefully, trusting the cover of night. Halfway up, they found a small ledge offering a partial view of the courtyard. Lanterns burned inside the walls, revealing a handful of guards leaning on spears. Arya motioned Brienne to wait as she eased forward to a vantage point. Her keen eyes made out Westerosi men and a few Essosi cells words. She saw no dragons, obviously, but the banner that hung above the main gate bore 3 painted heads. A Targaryen sign. She scanned the courtyard for their leader. Then she saw him, a man standing near a brazier, speaking to 2 knights. Pale hair indeed shimmered in the lantern light, though it was not as stark a silver white as the old Targaryens. He wore leather armor trimmed with red. Even at a distance, Arya sensed his arrogant posture. They listened to snatches of conversation floating on the wind. Another round of ships from Westeros we can seize. We'll make the Wolf Queen answer for every drop of Targaryen blood spilled. Word from Pentos is promising. More Sellswords might join us, bringing steel enough to land on the mainland's shores eventually. Arya felt her pulse tighten. This was no idle bandit. Rhaegar Sand seemed to be plotting something beyond petty raiding. She crouched on the rocks, memorizing his features, the sound of his voice. She needed proof, tangible evidence to bring back to the House of Black and White. If he truly threatened to reignite a Targaryen cause, if he intended to wage war on Westeros, the faceless men might consider his death of far greater consequence than hers. Brienne edged closer, her breath stirring Arya's ear. We should slip inside and gather more. If we can overhear a plan, maybe find letters or documents, we'll have real proof. Arya nodded. Together, they skirted along the cliffside, searching for a lesser-guarded entrance. An old sally port presented itself, half hidden behind a cluster of boulders. Slipping through, they found themselves in a dark corridor that smelled of damp stone and sea salt. Torches flickered in brackets at intervals. They kept to the shadows. More than once, they had to freeze as guards passed, but the fortress was not heavily garrisoned. Perhaps Rhaegar Sand lacked the numbers to fully staff it. Eventually, they reached a small interior courtyard. A heavy wooden door led into what looked like a war room. Through the cracks, they could see candlelight and hear voices. Carefully, they inched closer, pressing an ear to the door. Inside, Rhaegar Sand spoke with a heated cadence, describing how they would demand gold from Westerosi lords who still had Targaryen sympathies. If the Wolf Queen refused to pay tribute or surrender the throne, they would hire enough swords to force a landing. One day, they would retake the Red Keep in Daenerys' name. Daenerys was betrayed, her rightful throne stolen by that northern wolf, he declared, voice tight with fervor. We will avenge her. By the time we are done, the name Arya Stark will be cursed from Dorne to the Wall. Arya's jaw tightened at the threat. She heard the scrape of a quill on parchment, presumably drafting letters to supporters or potential allies. This was all the proof she needed. She met Brienne's gaze and nodded. They retreated silently, hearts pounding. Rhaegar Sand was real, a genuine threat to the realm, a man who might plunge Westeros into fresh bloodshed. He was precisely the kind of figure the faceless men would deem worthy, especially if he invoked claims of destiny or revenge, spurning the natural cycle of life and death to continue old vendettas. The House of Black and White believed that when mortal pride sought to cheat the inevitable or stir endless conflict, the many-faced god was owed a balancing gift. Reversing their path, they managed to exit the fortress undetected. Once on the beach, they rowed furiously back to the waiting fishing boat. Dawn tinged the horizon. The fisherman was visibly relieved to see them. Casting off, they sailed away as the sky brightened, the fortress shrinking behind them. Arya allowed herself a single exhale of relief. They had done it, found their offering. If the faceless men accepted Rhaegar Sand's life in exchange for hers, it would end their vendetta. And Westeros would be spared a new war. But the game was not yet won. They had to return to Braavos before the moon's turn, present this name and the evidence, and hope the House of Black and White agreed. If they demanded more, a direct confrontation and elaborate plan, Arya would have no choice but to comply. In the midst of her swirling thoughts, she felt a glimmer of resolve. She was prepared to do what was necessary to protect the realm. She had done so before, she would do so again. They reached Lys once more, changed vessels, and secured passage on a Braavosi trading ship heading back north. The captain, a barrel-chested man with pockmarked cheeks, gave them an odd look upon noticing Brienne's knightly bearing and Arya's quiet intensity, but made no comment. The journey back was fraught with tension for Arya and Brienne. They half expected assassins to emerge from the crew or from passing vessels. But no attack came. The gods or fate or sheer luck seemed to grant them safe passage. When at last they arrived in Braavos' lagoon, the day was bright, the Titan's watchful gaze unchanged. Arya felt a jolt of urgency. The moon would be full within the next few nights. She quickly made her way to the inn to check for messages. None waited. Brienne stood by, one hand on her sword. Without delay, they boarded a small skiff and crossed the canal to the House of Black and White once more. This time, they came in broad daylight, the city in full bustle around them. The same silent gloom greeted them at the temple. Arya stepped inside alone, instructing Brienne to remain at the entrance. Once again, she found the dark pool and the robed figures. The older woman stood waiting, as though she had known Arya's arrival to the second. I have the name, Arya announced, voice echoing against the marble pillars. Rhaegar Sand, a self-styled Targaryen claimant, seeking to raise an army against Westeros, threatening countless lives in the name of vengeance. He's taken a fortress near Lys. I have proof of his intentions. The woman's expression remained inscrutable, but the faint shift of her posture betrayed interest. The second figure, the robed man, stepped forward. Rhaegar Sand. We have heard of him. Some in this city wonder if he is truly Targaryen blood. Others say he's a charlatan. But you claim he is forging an army for war. Arya offered the letter she had stolen from the fortress, a snatch of parchment listing potential supporters in Essos. He's preparing to stir conflict that will cost thousands of lives. Lives the many-faced god would otherwise claim in due course. He is, in essence, trying to supplant the natural order, bent on stoking an endless war. That is a sin your temple has punished before, if I recall. The robed man glanced over the parchment, then passed it to the older woman. She studied it, her face a mask. At length, she raised her gaze to Arya. And you would give us this name in your place? Arya nodded, throat tight. Yes, take him instead of me. End his campaign of blood. This is a greater balance for the many-faced god. No innocent life traded, but a new havoc prevented. A cool silence pressed in. Then the older woman lowered the parchment. The House of Black and White will accept this offering, if you yourself deliver it. A slight tremor went through Arya. Meaning what? The woman's eyes gleamed. You once took the gifts of the many-faced god, learned to kill in his name, then turned away. Now you come to us again. We will accept Riegersand's life, but you must be the one to collect it as our instrument. You will don the face we choose, you will go forth and strike him down. If you succeed, your debt is paid. If you fail, the debt is claimed, your life forfeit. Arya felt her heart pound. She had not worn a borrowed face in years, not since the final confrontation with the waif. To do so again was to step back into the mind of a faceless assassin, to become no one for a time. Could she do that? And if she did, would she lose herself again? Her hand drifted to Needle's hilt. She forced it away, remembering who she was, Arya Stark, Wolf Queen. Yet she also recalled that the only thing standing between Westeros and a possible Targaryen uprising was the swift removal of Riegersand. And the only thing standing between her and the eternal vendetta of the Faceless Men was the acceptance of their terms. She lifted her chin. Very well. I will do it. A faint, chilling smile crossed the older woman's lips. Then come. The many-faced god welcomes you again. She turned, beckoning Arya deeper into the temple's darkness. Arya spared a glance behind her, toward the doorway. She could imagine Brienne waiting there, loyal, frightened, ready to draw steel if something went awry. This was a path she had to walk alone, just as before. She squared her shoulders and followed the faceless men into the depths. Shadows swallowed her form. A door closed somewhere, shutting out the world's faint daylight. She was led through a series of winding corridors, the smell of damp stone pressing in. At last, they reached a small chamber lit by a single candle. Shelves lined the walls, bearing jars and masks. Human faces prepared through arcane methods, waiting for those who served the temple's cause. The older woman motioned for Arya to kneel, then took up a vial of dark liquid. You remember the ritual, she said. Drink, let your face yield to the gift. Leave behind the name Arya Stark for the time you wear another's visage. Only when your task is done may you resume your name and your crown. Fail in this, and the many-faced god will claim what is his. Arya's throat felt parched. She remembered the taste of that thick concoction, how it had blurred her senses before unleashing the illusions that let her adopt another face. Taking a steadying breath, she thought of her family, her realm, and the promise she made to protect them. She took the vial and drank. The liquid was bitter, icy as it slid down her throat. Her vision swam. She dimly sensed the older woman pressing a mask to her face, a cool, leathery texture binding to her skin. A surge of memory tore through her. She was the girl scrubbing floors, the blind beggar, the cat of the canals. Then everything went black. When she woke, or half-woke, she felt strange. The chamber was dim. She lifted a hand to her cheek and felt unfamiliar contours. Her hair, too, seemed different, longer, coarser. A reflection in a polished mirror near the shelf showed a middle-aged man's face, weathered and scarred. She almost recoiled. But the older woman's voice reached her. Remember who you are not. You are no one until the task is done. Arya forced her breathing to steady. Beneath the illusions, her mind was her own, but her physical form would fool anyone. The woman handed her simple clothing, a drab cloak, and a worn sword. You sail to Lys, find Riegersand, deliver the gift. Return here with proof. Arya dressed, trying not to dwell on the eerie sensation. The fit was awkward, as though her limbs were borrowed, but she pushed aside the discomfort. She had no illusions about the path ahead. Riegersand was not an easy target. The fortress bristled with guards, and the man himself might be formidable. But she had faced worse. She fixed her new face into a calm mask and followed the woman back to the temple's entrance. Brienne stood by the door, eyes flaring wide when she saw the older woman emerge with a stranger at her side. Arya spoke first, voice rougher now. It's me, she said, and Brienne's hand went to her sword in shock. What sorcery? Brienne began. They insist I do it their way, Arya said. Trust me. We'll sail back to that fortress and I'll find Riegersand. Brienne's gaze traveled over Arya's borrowed face, concern warring with resolution. I go with you, whatever face you wear. I won't let you walk into that den of cutthroats alone. Arya gave a curt nod. The older woman at her side said nothing, merely lifted a finger to her lips in a silent command. Then she retreated into the temple and the doors shut, leaving Arya and Brienne standing on the steps under the bright Braavosi sky. They had precious little time. The moon would soon reach its zenith. Arya and Brienne hastened to the harbor, again chartering a small vessel for Lys. The entire journey, Brienne hardly knew how to address Arya or how to reconcile the face she saw with the presence she felt. At night, Arya caught her reflection in the black waters and felt a pang of disorientation. She had become no one again, if only for a while. Reaching Lys once more, they learned from cautious inquiries that Rhaegar Sand remained in his fortress, still extorting passing ships. Arya's plan formed quickly. She would pose as a mercenary seeking to join him, claiming to bring tidings from Westeros. Slipping inside the fortress, she would strike swiftly and vanish before the alarm could spread. Brienne disliked every facet of the plan, but she recognized it might work. "I'll stand by outside, ready to help you escape," the knight said. "But if something goes wrong, I'm coming in after you, illusions be damned." Arya laid a hand on Brienne's steel-plated forearm. "I appreciate it. Let's hope it doesn't come to that." They borrowed the fisherman's boat again, under a new guise for Arya, and approached the island fortress just after dusk. This time, rather than sneak up the goat path, Arya walked openly to the main gate, Brienne hanging back among the rocks. The guards barked a challenge, torchlight reflecting off their spears. Arya, using a practiced Bravosi accent, announced she was a messenger from certain Westerosi lords sympathetic to the Targaryen cause. The men eyed her suspiciously but allowed her inside, presumably because Rhaegar Sand was eager for new allies and coin. Inside the courtyard, Arya saw the same braziers, the same battered walls. A pair of sellswords led her to Rhaegar Sand himself, who stood in that same war room, poring over maps. He glanced up when she entered. His eyes were a pale gray, ringed with dissatisfaction. His hair, silver gold in the torchlight, hung loose around his shoulders. "And who are you?" he demanded. His tone dripped with arrogance, as though he expected everyone to bow in awe of his Targaryen blood. Arya bowed stiffly. "My name is Zhalar. I come from the Crownlands, bearing news of lords who might pledge gold to your cause." He studied her face, her borrowed face, and seemed satisfied by whatever he read there. "Speak, then, Zhalar." Arya began weaving a tale. Certain barons near the Blackwater remained outraged at the Wolf Queen, resentful of the North, longing for a rightful Targaryen heir. She had to feign a sneer whenever she spoke of Arya Stark, painting her as a tyrant. Rhaegar Sand listened with interest. He peppered her with questions about troop numbers and fortifications. She answered in carefully ambiguous terms. But behind every word, her heartbeat thrummed with urgency. She had to strike at the right moment, with no chance for him to cry alarm. She feigned a stumble in her story, pausing as though uncertain. Rhaegar Sand leaned forward, curiosity piqued. In that instant, Arya drew the small dagger hidden at her waist, a sliver of Valyrian steel concealed within her cloak. She lunged, aiming for his heart. But Rhaegar Sand was not slow. He twisted aside just enough that her blade buried itself in his ribs rather than a direct kill. He let out a choked snarl, staggering back. At once, two guards rushed forward, swords drawn. Arya pivoted to face the guards, her borrowed face set in grim concentration. She met the first guard's lunge with a deft sidestep, burying her blade beneath his chin. The second guard swung a heavy cut at her head, which she barely ducked. Rhaegar Sand, clutching his wounded side, barked for reinforcements. Footsteps thundered in the corridors. Arya seized that moment to finish the second guard with a swift thrust, then turned back to Rhaegar, who was trying to reach for a weapon. She slashed his forearm, sending the sword clattering. "This is the many-faced god's gift," she whispered, pressing the dagger to his throat. She saw confusion, fear, and rage swirl in his eyes. She twisted the blade, and a spray of blood drenched her borrowed form. Rhaegar Sand collapsed, gurgling, eyes rolling back as life fled him. She needed proof. Ripping a signet ring from his finger, she clutched it. Footsteps drew closer. She bolted from the war room, ducking into the corridor. A pair of sellswords blocked her way, swords raised. Shouts erupted behind her, more men charging after. She parried a strike, her borrowed sword ringing out. Hard steel crashed against her blade, nearly knocking it from her hand. She reeled back and delivered a desperate thrust, catching one sellsword in the throat. The other roared and closed in. Arya feinted left, then pivoted to bury the dagger beneath his ribs. He fell with a strangled cry. The corridor was too crowded with bodies. She needed another route. Racing into a side passage, she found a narrow staircase descending toward the lower levels. She bounded down 2 steps at a time. Shouts echoed overhead, the clang of steel on stone. Eventually, she burst into the old sally port that she and Brienne had used on their first INF. Filtration. Beyond lay the moonlit beach. Brienne, hearing the commotion, rushed to meet her with sword drawn. "Go!" Arya urged, her voice a ragged rasp in the guise of Zhalar. They sprinted down the goat path, guards spilling from the fortress behind them, torches bobbing in the darkness. An arrow whistled past Arya's ear. She ducked, feet scrabbling on loose gravel. Brienne dropped behind to block an incoming pursuer, parrying 2 quick thrusts before elbowing the man aside. Together, they made the beach, leaping into the rowboat. A hidden oarsman bribed beforehand shoved off at once. Arrows hissed from the cliffs, one embedding in the side of the boat. Another splashed into the water. But soon the darkness enfolded them, carrying them out of range. In the distance, an alarm bell clanged, echoing off the rocky shore. Panting, Arya pressed a hand to her side, checking for injuries. She was battered but not seriously wounded. She felt the sticky warmth of Rhaegar's blood coating her borrowed visage. A wave of nausea churned in her gut. It was done, she told herself. Rhaegar Sand's life was taken. The Targaryen threat in Essos was decapitated. And she had the signet ring as proof. Brienne's eyes shone with concern as she huddled close in the boat. Did you get what you needed? Arya held up the ring. He's dead. That should suffice. By dawn, they were back on the fisherman's boat, sails unfurled to Reachless. The fortress behind them was likely in chaos, its would-be Targaryen heir lying dead in a pool of blood. The boat's crew watched Arya with a mixture of fear and awe. She looked like a battered mercenary drenched in gore. As the sun rose, she felt an odd shift in her skin. The borrowed face itched, her own features struggling beneath. But the mask held for now. They reached Braavos within days, the voyage silent and tense. Once again, they made for the House of Black and White. Arya stepped onto the temple steps, climbed them slowly, each footstep echoing with finality. Brienne remained just outside. The temple's door opened on its own as though expecting her. Inside, she found the older woman and the man, both waiting near the dark pool. Their gazes flicked to the blood-stained cloak, the battered sword. Arya approached, breath unsteady. She dropped Rhaegar Sand's signet ring onto the stone floor at their feet. He's gone, she said, voice reverberating oddly through the borrowed throat. The man stooped to pick up the ring. He studied it, then gave a slight nod. The debt is paid, he intoned. You have delivered a soul of greater consequence than your own. The Wolf Queen is released. A faint tremor of relief coursed through Arya. Then release me, she murmured, pressing a hand to her stolen face. The woman stepped forward with a small flask. Drink again. Claim your own face, your own name. You are Arya Stark. No longer a servant of the House of Black and White. Arya accepted the flask, swallowing its pungent contents. The chamber swirled around her. Her flesh burned, then chilled. She felt the mask peel away. When she opened her eyes, her own hands, her own skin greeted her. She exhaled shakily. The older woman's gaze bore into hers. Pray we do not meet again, Arya Stark. If ever you invoke the many-faced god once more, it will not end so kindly. Arya bowed stiffly. She said nothing else, turning on her heel to leave the temple. Outside, Brienne met her with palpable relief, seeing Arya's real face again. The two women descended the steps into the Braavosi daylight. For a moment, Arya paused to breathe in the sea air, letting the brightness wash over her. She was free. The House of Black and White would not hound her or threaten her realm. Rhaegar Sand was gone, his insurrection cut short. A measure of peace might hold in Westeros. They did not linger in Braavos. Within hours, they were aboard a ship heading west. The crossing back to King's Landing seemed longer, the wind less cooperative. Yet Arya felt no impatience. She could endure a slow voyage, content in the knowledge that a sword was no longer hanging over her head or over those she cared about. The old debt was settled. Now all that remained was to return home and continue the work she'd begun, shaping a realm guided by justice, not fear. When at last the Red Keep's towers came into view, rising above the sprawl of King's Landing, Arya felt a profound sense of belonging. The city was not perfect, no city ever was, but it had become a place of hope and effort, a testament to how far Westeros had come from the ashes left by Daenerys Targaryen. Upon disembarking, she was greeted by Tyrion on the docks, his expression a mixture of relief and exasperation. His witty tongue all but failed him when he saw the weariness in Arya's face. You're alive, he said, as though he'd half expected otherwise. And back. I trust the House of Black and White will no longer haunt us. Arya managed a small smile. It won't. The threat is ended. He ushered her up into a carriage. Brienne followed, explaining pieces of the story in hushed tones. Tyrion shook his head in wonder. You waded back into the darkest corners of Braavos to settle old scores. One day, Queen Arya, you'll give me a heart attack. She allowed herself a wry chuckle. I hope that day is far off, Tyrion. Westeros still needs you. That night, she sat once more in the throne room, the battered iron throne looming behind her as she convened her council. Davos was present, looking worn from the battles at sea but proud to report that the pirate threat had been largely contained. The Crown's new warships would soon be ready to sail, ensuring safer shipping routes. News from the Stormlands, the Vale, and the Reach was largely positive, no major unrest. Letters from Sansa in Winterfell spoke of continuing prosperity in the north. All around, the realm seemed to stabilize even further. Tyrion then informed the council of what he had learned in her absence. The Iron Bank of Bravos had sent word that they were gratified by the Crown's timely repayment schedule and wished to continue a cordial relationship. Possibly they had caught wind of Arya's dealings with the House of Black and White and decided that pressing her further was unwise. She could not help but take grim satisfaction in the notion that no matter how powerful the Iron Bank thought itself, it now knew better than to provoke the Wolf Queen who had the ear of the Faceless Men, however tenuous that link might have been. In the days that followed, Arya returned to her familiar routines, rising early to train, holding open court, working alongside Tyrion, Davos, Brienne, and the rest of the council to manage the kingdom's affairs. Yet something had changed in her. A quiet line of tension in her brow reminded her of the weight of old shadows. She had donned the mask of no one last time, walked in the steps of an assassin. That knowledge sat in her soul like a dark echo. She had done it to protect her people, to preserve the peace. She did not regret the act, but she hoped with every fiber of her being that she would never need to do it again. A week after her return, she stood atop the battlements of the Red Keep at sunset, gazing out over the city as the sky blazed orange and pink. She breathed the warm air and listened to the distant hum of King's Landing's life. Children's laughter mixed with the clanging of blacksmiths, the barking of dogs, the faint melody of some minstrel's tune. For the first time in months, she felt the possibility of genuine peace, for herself as much as for the realm. The Targaryen pretender in Essos was gone, the House of Black and White no longer pursued her, and Westeros was healing. She thought of her father, Eddard Stark, the man who once told her that doing the right thing often came at great cost. She thought of Jon beyond the wall, living in quiet solitude. She thought of Sansa in Winterfell, forging alliances and presiding over the North's renaissance. She thought of all those who had fallen, her mother, Robb, countless friends and foes, and hoped their spirits found rest in seeing the land they had fought for begin to flourish again. As twilight deepened, she closed her eyes, feeling the wind brush her face. The road ahead still stretched long. There would be skirmishes, rebellions, old feuds flaring up. She was certain of it. Westeros had never been a land free of ambition or conflict. But she believed that so long as she guided from the throne without lust for power, so long as she wielded justice and compassion in equal measure, the realm would endure. She opened her eyes. Distant lanterns sparkled in the harbor, reflecting on the water like stars come down to earth. Tomorrow, she would hold court again, oversee petitions, plan new roads, ensure enough grain for winter, and see that the watch was well supplied. She would stay vigilant for the next threat. But for tonight, at least, she let herself savor a rare moment of contentment. She was Arya Stark, Wolf Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. She had faced the ghosts of her past and emerged tempered, still standing on her own terms. So the hush of evening settled over the Red Keep, and a new chapter began for Arya's reign. In the city below, people went about their lives, grateful for the peace that she and her council had fought to maintain. Across the narrow sea, men whispered rumors of the Wolf Queen who had bested pirates, put down a Targaryen pretender, and come to terms with the fabled Faceless Men. But for Arya, the glory mattered little. She cared more that children in the streets could play without fear, that travelers could move along the roads unmolested, that harvests might be shared rather than stolen by warring lords. In that modest but essential victory lay the true legacy of her rule. She lingered on the battlements until the sky turned a deep indigo. Each star that emerged above seemed to wink in silent accord. Once, she had roamed the world as a lone wolf, no one to answer to but herself. Now she wore a crown, but only in the service of those whose lives were shaped by her decisions. Perhaps that was the essence of being a Stark, knowing that duty came before desire, and that family, honor, and the welfare of the realm must guide every choice. She would keep faith with those principles, no matter how many trials awaited her. The Wolf Queen had faced shadows and survived. Whatever else the future held, she stood ready to meet it, dagger in hand if need be, but always with her heart turned toward the betterment of her people. And so night fell softly on King's Landing, a city in the midst of rebirth, under the watchful protection of a queen who had once been no one and had chosen, in the end, to be someone for everyone.